What am I going to use to make my game? While prepping for an upcoming game jam, at some point every jammer faces the same question. What am I going to use to make my game? Well, look no further. I've got something just for you. .BigBang is a fully featured, web-based game-making platform that you should totally use for your next game jam. So here we go. Let's just jump right into it. Here are 10 surprising reasons that you should use .BigBang for your next game jam. You don't need to download anything. .BigBang runs in your browser and works on any device. Laptop, smartphone, tablet, console, or even your smart fridge. All you need to do is make an account and you're ready to start making games. You don't need to worry about downloading or updating an app, how long your builds will take, or where you're gonna host your game. We've got everything taken care of for you. As long as you have an internet connection, you can start sharing your games right away. .BigBang runs best in Chrome or Chromium-based browsers like Edge, Brave, and others. And if you'd rather not work in a browser, you're also welcome to install the desktop app. You can share your game instantly with a link and play with your friends. In order to share your game with your friends, all you need to do is click the share button, copy the link, and send it to them. Or just send the link that's in your browser. Once they click the link, they're already playing your game. And when you use the share button, you get a multiplayer link. So you can actually instantly play your game live with your friends. This mechanic is great for playtesting your game while your game's in progress during the jam, and really great for sharing your game with your family and friends once the jam's over. Your game will work on any device, console, mobile, desktop, you name it. Like I mentioned before, no need to worry about where to host your game or how people are going to play it. We've got that covered. If you're planning on working with a team, .BigBang makes that super easy for you. Just by sharing a multiplayer link with your teammates, you and your teammates can instantly start building out your game together. .BigBang supports live multiplayer editing, which is the click of a button, and you can all playtest the game together while you're building it. Here's a big one. Networking is built in. So if you've ever wanted to make a multiplayer game, .BigBang is the place for you. Every game on .BigBang is multiplayer by default. All you have to do is share the multiplayer link. Our networking system is super straightforward. Entities in your game can be marked as networked by just adding a tag. And there are a ton of multiplayer games and scripts on the platform already that can show you the ropes of writing networking code. Also, we have great articles and documentation introducing you to the various concepts you'll need to know when you want to take your multiplayer aspect to the next level. Did you know you can have all the power of VS Code in your browser? Well, with .BigBang, you can. .BigBang has a built-in VS Code editor with TypeScript, complete with debugging capabilities and autocomplete. You can use the editor to edit code while the game is running and see updates happen in real time. We have plenty of documentation and videos that cover scripting in .BigBang as well. You'll have access to thousands of scripts for your use. .BigBang creators have created tons of scripts that you can use in your own games. Just select an entity, select Browse Items, and you can search for scripts that other users have made. For example, if I want to make this door open, and I don't know how, I can search through scripts until I find a door script that works for my purpose. You can also remix other users' scripts to repurpose them for your own use. Remixing and repurposing scripts can really speed up your game-making process during a game jam, where time is everything. And whenever you write a script of your own, you can easily share it with other creators to use the script in their games. .BigBang allows creators to remix games, meaning that creators can actually get their own copy of another game and edit it. If you find a game you like and you're wondering how it was made, as long as it's set as remixable, you can actually take a look into how they made that game and how everything works. You can even make edits of your own, or entirely make your own version of the game if you'd like. Big Bang has made some starter templates that you can use as well, like a first-person shooter template and an obstacle course template. There's also a template for people who are new to scripting and want to learn more about it, or new to building out an environment and want to learn how to do that. So definitely check those out. You can find the links in the description. You're probably wondering where all these lovely art assets are coming from. Well, Big Bang has a robust, built-in voxel object editor, complete with animation capabilities. You can make your own assets, and then jump into your game and drag them right into your level. There is a huge library of voxel art for use in your game. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, what if I can't make art? You're in luck. Just like with scripts, Big Bang has thousands of voxel objects made by other creators that you can use in your game. If you're working with a team, your teammates can make art that you can instantly drag into your game. And if you're an artist, you can make your own art usable by other creators. You can talk to the devs directly for help. If at any point you're stuck or need some guidance, you can reach out to the Big Bang devs on Discord. The link's in the description. The devs have been making games with Big Bang for years and are happy to help out creators as much as we can. We've also got documentation, videos, and live streams that show you all sorts of ways you can use Big Bang. Whether you're an artist or a programmer, if it's your first game jam, or if you're a veteran, or if you're anywhere in between, Big Bang has a place for you. So that was 10 reasons to use Big Bang at your next game jam. If you want to give it a try, go to .bigbang.com to get started and join our Discord to meet other creators and have your questions answered by the same developers who built the platform. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching and happy jamming!
Hello, everybody. I'm Mary Kenny, and I am your keynote addresser today. So thank you so much for watching. First of all, I really appreciate all of you being here. And I also want to congratulate all of you on participating in the Global Game Jam. It is such a big name and exciting experience and such a great time to build your profile as a creator, your teamwork. It's just such a great opportunity. So I hope you all are really excited about the fact that you're part of this. I really appreciate all of you being here. And I also want to congratulate all of you on participating in the Global Game Jam. It is such a big name and exciting experience and such a great time to build your profile as a creator, your teamwork. It's just such a great opportunity. So I hope you all are really excited about the fact that you're part of this. The reason that I'm giving this talk and the focus of this talk is going to be on games history, aka Why We Need Gamer Girls, which is the name of my book, which is what we're going to be focusing on. It's really easy for all of us, me included, to get really wrapped up in the day-to-day making of games, creating assets, fixing code, coming up with ideas, coming up with pitches, making our green light pitches. And because it's so easy to get wrapped up in the actual creation of the things that we love, sometimes we can overlook the culture surrounding it. Coming up with ideas, coming up with pitches, making our green light pitches. And because it's so easy to get wrapped up in the actual creation of the things that we love, sometimes we can overlook the culture surrounding it. We can fall behind on what our own history is, what current events are, what's currently being written about, what's happening labor-wise in our industry. It's really easy to lose track of that in the midst of everything else we're trying to do, because creating games is not easy, which, believe me, I know. But it is really important for all of us to know our history as game developers, as people who are participating in this industry and creating culture every day. The games that we create are culture. The ways that we talk about the games we create are culture. And because of that, it's really important for us to know where we're coming from as an industry so we can look forward to where we're going and where we want to be going instead of kind of oopsing into it. So I'm going to talk about history because that is the subject of my book. And my hope with this talk is that it inspires you going forward. Knowing your history can help you know what kind of game developer you want to be, what kind of influence you want to have on this industry. It can help you build a healthier practice for yourself, for your teams, for your studios. So my question is really specific. It's why do we need a book like the one I wrote? As I say here, I am the author of Gamer Girls, 25 Women Who Built the Games Industry. Why do we need a book like that? Why does it matter? And so that's what I'm going to be digging into in this keynote address. But again, the bigger thing to think about here is not just what is our history, but what does that mean about who we are today and who we are going forward? And that's something I hope is in the back of your mind as you jam on games, as you pitch games going forward, as you found studios, as you join studios, and just think about your role in this culture. What does our history tell us about the industry that we don't already know? Every single industry has myths around it about who the auteurs are, who the successful teams are, what it takes to be successful. And sometimes those myths are similar to history, but rarely do they actually echo accurately the history of any industry, really. So what does the actual history tell us about ourselves that we don't already know? And how did we lose track of it along the way? I also talk a little bit about my methods for finding all of this information because I hope it will help you as you continue to learn more about the industry and trying to keep track of what is happening in the industry. This will help you do your own research going forward as well, not just looking at what I already did. Promises for this talk. There will be colorful slides, as you can already tell, because this is one of them. There will be history. Yep, went over that. There will be book excerpts. I will be reading from my book. I'm not going to put big chunks of text up on the slides because I think that would be horrible to look at. But just as someone who doesn't love reading big chunks of text on a presentation, but I will be reading from the book, and you are always welcome to pick it up if you like what you hear. There will be action items for each of us as individuals and for our studios, and there will be a cat photo if you stay all the way till the end. I promise. So hold on for that, if nothing else. All book art featured was created by the incredibly skilled Selene Pereira. Selene was the illustrator artist of Gamer Girls, and so all of the art that I'm featuring comes from Selene. So Selene is great. So who am I? I am the author of Gamer Girls. I am a senior writer at Insomniac Games. That's my day job. That's what I spend the majority of my time doing. I am a comics writer. I've written Godzilla, My Little Pony, Read Only Memories, all sorts of things for IDW, primarily. I am a lecturer at Indiana University in narrative design. I teach it usually once a year. I was a Forbes 30 Under 30 in Games in 2020 and a BAFTA Breakthrough, and I'm a current member of the Game Awards Future Class. So those are all things to know about me. If you did not know who I was, that is who I am and why I am talking about this subject. What is this book and why does it exist? Like I said, this is specific to my work and my scholarship and lecturing and all of that, but it is also important because I want to talk about what I'm talking about really here is history and culture, and that is something that you're all part of by participating in the Global Game Jam. So what is this book? Why does it exist? It's a collection of 25 biographies of women whose work shaped the industry that we know today. It is by no means an extensive list of all of the influential women who have ever worked in the games industry. There are hundreds. It would be a much longer book. This is really focusing on women who were part of the industry in its earlier days, who were really part of shaping it before it was what it looks like today. So that is the focus of the book. That is how the research went into the book. That is how it was pitched. An even shorter pitch would be people whose names diehard video game fans should know, but don't always. Some do, but in some cases, even really hardcore gamers had never heard of some of the people in this book, and that is what I was trying to correct by writing it. The earliest biographies that you will find in this book begin in the 1960s, which may seem early to you because it is, and we'll go into that a little bit more later. And they worked through the early 2000s. They were writers, producers, designers, programmers, artists, puzzle designers. There is a very wide range of people who appear in the book, which was also really important to me. I am a writer in the games industry, and writers often get a lot of love from the press, but we are by no means the only members of a game dev team. As any of you, again, participating in this jam would know, it really takes a multi-talented, multi-skilled team to build a game. And so it was important to me to really capture that in this book with these profiles. It's written for teenagers. It is a YA book, and I wrote it specifically for people who want to break into the industry, written as accessible to them by telling them, again, the industry's history. It was important to me. It is important to me to make this a book that anybody could pick up if they have the slightest interest in video games. I didn't want to throw a bunch of terminology at people that they might not be familiar with. Even stuff that we use on a daily basis, it's fairly simple. Words like engine and, and things like that can be it can be hard if you are not familiar with the industry already. It can kind of feel like unnecessary barriers to your understanding. So I wrote it in a way where I'm constantly defining terms. I'm trying to deconstruct jargon, and that is because I want the number one goal of this book is to invite people into the industry, to get people to understand the culture of our industry, the truths about our industry, and then be able to go forward from there in how they view the video game industry going forward and themselves and their role in it. So to talk about why this book exists and dig into that history, it's easiest to start with the pitch. Which I worked with Eric Smith, who is a wonderful, wonderful book agent at PS Literary. Highly recommend him if you are a writer who's trying to sell books. Eric came to me initially because he had seen my work as a game dev and said, we need a book like this. We need a book that highlights women's role in the industry. And I went that book has to exist already. There has to be a book that is a history book that is focused on this. But there wasn't. I did the research, and there was not specifically a book that focused on women in the early days of video games who were helping shape what is now the culture of video games. There was nothing like that. There was nothing that specific, and there was certainly nothing like that was targeted to a YA audience. Everything that I was able to find was really targeted at adults, was much more, here are the facts, here are the dates, which is great and very useful, and was very useful in my research. But we were looking at creating a book that really invited in a new audience that was not already invested in video games, that did not know what they were getting into with this culture, and that invited them in, right? So the transition from doing this research, realizing that this book was necessary, really also came because I did another talk, much like I am doing now. So I'm going to read a section from the book, from the intro of my book. So here we go. A few months before I started working on this book, I was asked to speak at a game design boot camp for teenage girls. Yes, I thought, more young women in the games industry. I video conferenced in. They were in the Midwest, and I lived in California at the time. I put on a wide smile and introduced myself. I talked about what a game writer does, which is everything from pitching level ideas to character arcs to writing dialogue. I gave an overview of the production process. I talked about portfolios, skill sets, and going to college. I outlined the importance of teamwork, collaboration, and humility. Then, when I was through my spiel, I asked if anyone had questions. Hands shot up, and I was thrilled. I couldn't wait to talk more about the industry and the projects that I love. Question 1. Could you tell us about Gamergate? Followed by, has anyone attacked you online? Then, doesn't the harassment make you want to leave? I could feel myself deflate. Is that all they wanted to talk about? Online harassment campaigns and hate mobs? The purpose of this book is to show that any girl can be a game developer. But as I was writing it, I had to face a simple but devastating question. Do I believe it? Yes, is my knee-jerk stubborn reply. My more measured version is yes, but there are obstacles, and often unfair ones. On my worst days, days when I feel strung out, deflated, and gritty with tears, my answer is sometimes. There are a few things that will reduce me to sometimes as quickly as Gamergate and the toxic spaces it left behind. This isn't a book about Gamergate, but in any discussion of modern games and the people who made them, it's impossible to ignore. Gamergate changed the way people live online and off it, especially in the slice of the world we call the video game industry. Death threats and harassing mobs drove talented developers away from the industry, subjecting underrepresented game devs and creatives, and those defending them, to an avalanche of abuse that still resurfaces. Women and gender nonconforming creators of color, in particular, were targeted by the attacks, but left out of the coverage that followed. At the core of the Gamergate mob was a question about identity. Who was allowed to be a gamer and who wasn't? For a small but vocal and aggressive minority, it seemed that if you weren't a white, cis, able-bodied man, you weren't allowed to be a part of games, either as a developer or as a player. As the Washington Post wrote in 2014, Gamergate is less a one-off scandal and more a long-term, slow-burning campaign. In other words, Gamergate is not going away. Despite its impact, very few people know how to categorize it, let alone stop it. Game studios have tried. The New York Times has tried. The United Nations, countless internet threads, game developers, conference talks, they've all tried. The results have been so frustrating that many of us, especially those who have been harassed by ex-Gamergaters, respond to questions about Gamergate with, can we talk about something else? So it took me a few moments to respond when the girls asked me about Gamergate. To their credit, they waited for me to collect my thoughts. As silent moments ticked by, I realized I had to tell them exactly how I felt about Gamergate. I'd offered them a look at what it meant to be a game developer. That includes the fun things like launch parties, gaming conferences, and announcement trailers. But it also includes one of the cruelest, most defining moments of pop culture in the last 20 years. These girls wanted to make games, but they'd also grown up reading a torrent of articles that chronicled, sometimes in lurid detail, all the toxicity, hate campaigns, and doxing that seemed to come along with the job. If I were them, I'd ask the same thing. Certainly, there are days when I wanted to leave social media, but completely leave game development? Not really, because this is my dream job. It can be difficult like working in any field, but there's so much more happening behind the scenes than what players, even passionate ones, ever see. There's a lot more to that intro, but that you are getting the basic gist of how this book came to be and how my goals came to be, who I wanted to write it for, and what I wanted them to take from the book. As I said extensively in that reading, Gamergate, we may try to forget it, but for the people who lived through it, it hasn't gone away. A lot of the leftovers, a lot of the people who participated in Gamergate and the people who were targeted by Gamergate are still around. It is not completely gone. And because of that, it's disingenuous to pretend that it was an isolated incident or that it's not still affecting the industry today. And that's why I wanted to write this book, because going back to that question of who is allowed to be a gamer, who is allowed to be a game developer, so much of what Gamergate tried to posit was that this is an industry, this is a group that once belonged to a certain type of person. White, cis, able-bodied guys. That's it. Those seem to be the only people who had been in this tiny little group. Both among Gamergaters, this seemed to be the belief. We've also seen this in pop culture a lot. This is who we see when we see groups gathered around the D&D table, groups going to the arcade. This is who tends to get depicted in those spaces. That's why this book exists, because the point of this book is that that's not true and that it was never true. That was never the full spread of who we see who are gamers. It was never the full spread of who we see that are game developers. It's simply inaccurate. And pretending that this space once belonged to a certain group and then finally spread elsewhere is wrong. It's disingenuous. It has always belonged to many different kinds of people, and it still belongs to many different kinds of people, and it is getting more diverse every single year, and that is exciting and good and tells us that there is a really promising future in the types of stories and games that we're going to see going forward. So, how did I find these women? If the point of this book is that many of the accomplishments of these women were forgotten, buried, left out of credits, just that people do not know about them. How does one go about finding history that is hidden? The history is there, is the short answer. You just have to do a little bit of digging. I cannot speak highly enough about the work being done by games journalists across the field. They are chronicling game devs and their work and their struggles and their excitement every single day. The majority of what ended up in the book I found first through gaming websites and then was able to verify with other sources. Great games journalism is being done at Game Developer, formerly Gamasutra, Kotaku, Rock Paper Shotgun, Game Informer. These sites, as well as Vice, really gave me a ton of stuff that I could dig into and people I could reach out to for further details on these women and their accomplishments. The Strawn National Museum of Play is phenomenal. I suggest everybody participate however you can, read their articles, visit if you can. Very good and extensive history, again, of our industry, which is not nearly as new as we seem to pretend it is. There is a rich history for all of us to dig into. In addition, people from the NYU Game Center and fellow game developers were such a big help in finding these women, pulling together their histories, pulling together interviews. I cannot speak highly enough for NYU and all the help that they gave me. There is a list of names in the acknowledgments in my book, and this book wouldn't exist without them. Ton of help from many, many sources. So, like any author, I went into the book with a lot of assumptions, and they were wrong. They were mostly pretty much wrong. My first concern was we wanted to do the book from jump. We decided it would be about 25 women. Good number. And I was really worried that there wouldn't be enough names. There weren't enough women working in the industry. And this is what I'm talking about. I was a game developer at the time. I had been a game developer for years. I had gone to graduate school for game design. And I was still buying into the myth that women in games were pretty rare. It wasn't true, as it turned out. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to find 25 names. And yet, after doing my initial research, I had over 100 names on my list of women who would fit the bill, fit the very specific bill of just not just women working in games, but women working in the early days of video games. Over 100 women. Had to pare it down with the availability of research, the availability of interviews. There was a ton of criteria, mostly in how much I was able to fact check, but plenty of names. There were a lot of people working in this industry in its early days, and a lot of them were women. In addition to making sure that I could fact check everything, that I could interview people when relevant, like I said before, I was really trying to find a widespread of which countries people were from, what roles they were in, what their firsts in the industry were. That was all part of the paring down process. But if I wanted to write more books on this subject, it would be totally possible. There are plenty of women to choose from, which is really exciting when you think about it, even if at the time it was somewhat daunting. Another really important thing for me in the book was to write about history, not about idols. What do I mean by that? From the beginning, this was not a book about flawless people making flawless games that are perfect and had, perfect Metacritic scores. That would be difficult because Metacritic did not exist back in the day. But that wasn't the point of the book, right? I really wanted to talk about people operating the space who had a big impact on this space. And they had missteps, they had flaws, they had dreams, they had hopes, and telling their real stories, the good and the bad and the moments where they struggled, that to me was honoring their stories and honoring our culture of video games without flattening those stories. I think turning people into idols is how we flatten history, and we make it harder for us in the present to relate to it. But being able to tell the full story of each of these women and what they were interested in, what they were trying to do, what they believed about themselves in the industry when they got in, how that's changed over the years, that's how we really capture these moments in history that are part of our culture in the video game industry. So that was very important to me. In digging into their stories, I found a lot of surprises and I found a lot of common themes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the surprises that I found along the way. And then I'm going to dig into some of those common themes. Again, as I'm going through this, as people participating in the Global Game Jam, as game developers yourselves, especially with the surprises, with the themes, I hope you start to reflect on your own journey as a game developer and where you want to go in your future in this industry. So, stories that surprised me, starting off with Donna Bailey and Mabel Addis. They are some of the earliest game devs to appear in the book, and they are early. And it surprised me how early they were. For Donna, she began working in games in 1980. For Mabel, she began in 1963. 1963, to some of you, you're going, what video game could you make in 1963? We sure were not on PlayStation 5 at that point. What was she making it for? And in Mabel's case, she was primarily a teacher. She was an educator, and she worked to create one of the first video games ever. She was the writer on it. It was an economic simulator, and she was writing the story that really got people invested. We often call that the narrative hook, even today. And she was writing scripts, and this audio was played alongside slides, and they were teaching kids economics using storytelling, using multimedia. So she is considered one of the first video game writers ever in 1963. So, like I said, one of the big myths about our industry is that there was a certain group of people who were interested in video games, either as gamers or developers, and later everybody else came along. Women, people of color, later they strolled in. And that's simply not true. We're already seeing that Donna and Mabel and several others who are in the book were in this industry as early as the 1960s, as the 1980s, as in the 70s as well. So that surprised me. Aurea Harvey is fascinating. A ton of talks that you can look up. I recommend watching them all. They are all very good. She has a great talk with the NYU Game Center that I watched several times while writing her chapter. What surprised me about Aurea was that she primarily sees herself as an artist, and she's an artist who works in multimedia. So she was one of the earliest, artists in working in HTML in the early internet, and expanded that with her husband into working on games. And she and her husband's goal with creating these spaces was this interactive art. And that is what we're looking at with video games. Their work was not formulaic in any way. It was very unique. They were constantly challenging themselves to try new things. If you interact with their games, you will see it is so artistic. There's not a better way to say it. These are artists who are trying to create interactive spaces where players can decide what they are going to do and how they are going to do it with those pieces of art. It's really fascinating. Like I said, all of their talks are worth watching, are worth reading. She was a great example for me of somebody who comes into this from an art background. It's not just an interest in tech. It's not just an interest in coding, although that certainly became part of it. But she's coming in with this background in art appreciation and art history and creation that really shaped really artistic and thoughtful games. And that is another perspective that we don't always see in games. And yet it shapes our industry as much as anything else. Kazuko Shibuya, she surprised me because she has a ton of influence. She was an artist on Final Fantasy, and much of what we have come to recognize as key to that art style came from her. She created it. She was one of the first artists to work on it. She worked on the original Final Fantasy. She kept working on it for years. She wasn't in the credits of the game. It was shocking to me that someone who had so much influence on the game's look and feel and how players interacted with it and what they remembered about it and how it looks to this day because of those early designs in the original Final Fantasy could be left off the credits, that we could not know her name. It was many years before she was included in the credits, before she got her own Wikipedia page, before she was recognized as somebody who had and has a major influence in video games. Final Fantasy is one of the most influential games ever made, and she was one of the most influential people on it. And for years, we did not know her name. And it was shocking to me that somebody who worked on a game that was a hit in the 80s could be forgotten so quickly. Any scholar of history will tell you that we have forgotten a lot more of our history than people realize. There are assumptions that we make based on pop culture and storytelling, and those are helpful and great, but the actual facts are very easy to lose. And what really surprised me about digging into her chapter and her work and looking at different talks she had done and different teachings she's done, I was really surprised how recent that history could be and still not be readily accessible. And that is why I wanted to write about her. And then Danielle Button-Berry. I knew about Mule, which Mule, which was one of her first major games that connected, that was multiplayer. Danielle Button-Berry's primary focus was multiplayer. She was very big on, I have a magnet of one of many of her awesome quotes on my fridge that talks about how nobody on their deathbed wishes they had spent more time alone in front of their computer. That was her mindset, and she created games to connect people. She compared it often to a family gathering around a board game. Games can connect people. People play with one another. That's how they relate to one another. It's a great experience, and she did that with video games. And she was one of the earliest pioneers in multiplayer video games. Mule was fantastic. It is fantastic. It was a brilliant multiplayer game, but I didn't realize how prolific she was beyond Mule. She kept working for years and years with this focus on multiplayer, both as a game dev, and she was also a speaker. She wrote extensively about her own experiences as a transgender woman, about as a game developer, as a parent. She wrote about all of this in her blog. Fantastic writer. Just one of the many people in this book who I did not get to talk to because she has passed away and had by the time I started working on this book. I would give just about anything to have been able to talk to her, because her mindset about how to connect people with video games has so much in common with what I'm talking about, which is our culture of games and how we are creating culture with every single game that we create. Another person who I recommend, look up every talk she ever gave, look up her interviews, look up her blog. Fascinating stuff. You will learn a ton. She was an absolutely brilliant game developer. And so now I want to talk about some of the common themes that came up across all 25 of the profiles. And I really want to talk about this again because I hope you can apply it to yourself in your own practice as a game developer and your goals as a worker and laborer and creator. And in your studios. I hope you kind of keep these things in mind going forward with the kinds of games you want to build and the kinds of team environments that you want to build. Passion. We love this word in video games, both for better and for worse. Most of the people that end up making video games do it because they love it. They grew up with video games, or many people come into video games later in life and discover something they love. They discover something really fascinating about it. I have talked to many people who started in film or TV who didn't grow up with video games, but once they were introduced to them, were just floored by the creativity that goes into video games from everybody, for the creativity of the programmers and engineers and the creativity of the writers and artists and everything that goes into a video game. And that passion is it is hard to meet a game dev who does not have it in one degree or another. I say this from personal experience, but also definitely from writing this book. But what does that mean? That means it can be easy to take advantage of people's passion, to make them feel like they are not honoring their passion and love enough if they are not working at a certain amount for a certain amount of time, et cetera, et cetera. So as a game developer and as a person leading teams, part of teams, you have to honor that passion. You have to allow people to own their own content, respect their work, and that lets that passion thrive. It's not just constant criticism and notes, it's also praise and working together in collaboration. Honoring it is really important to maintaining that passion instead of burning people out. Don't abuse it. Again, burnout is going to come up a lot on this slide. Burnout is the antithesis to passion. Burnout makes people wonder why they cared and why they loved the industry that they were planning to be a part of. Encouraging healthy work-life balance, encouraging people to take breaks when they need it, encouraging them to keep working on something if it's not ready yet, that they don't have to be done on a certain deadline when possible. These are all ways to not abuse that passion and, again, to keep fostering it. Stamping out toxicity. Toxic workplaces kill passion real fast. If you are being bullied at work, if you are being belittled at work, if you are not being respected for your ideas and for your excitement, that is all part of a toxic workplace. And that forces people to either quit that job, they can't be there anymore, or to mentally check out so that it doesn't hurt them anymore. If you are forcing your employees to mentally check out, that's going to kill their passion for the industry. If you yourself are discovering that you're having to mentally check out to get through the day, that's a killer of passion. That's not a good sign. Credits. As I noted before, talking about Final Fantasy, credits are sometimes stolen. People work on a game and then are not credited for it. That is the easiest way that we lose sight of our history and sight of our true culture, and not just the myths about our culture and who is allowed to participate and who is welcome in this space. You need to credit your developers. In the game itself, where and how are the people who worked on it listed? Did you list, that's typo, did you list the whole team? Did they have their correct titles? Are they listed for the work they did on your game? If they're not, that's a problem. On the press tour, really think about who is invited to speak to the press. Is it always one person? Can you diversify that at all? Who is your community team supporting? Who is getting the help and the training they need to be able to speak to the press about games? One thing I noted in a lot of my research was that in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, games at Game Awards ceremonies on the press tour were often represented by one person. And that makes teams seem smaller. It makes the auteur myth really continue, regardless of its truth. It makes it feel like only a certain type of person, because we're getting such a small sample of who worked on the game, is a game developer. How can you diversify that? Who else can you support? Who else can you uplift as was also part of this team and was very important to the process, which is everybody on the team? How have you listed contributors in the awards? Again, did you list the people who worked on the thing that was nominated for an award? Whose names appear? Do they have their correct titles? So on and so forth. How can you be more accurate and more equitable in who you're crediting on your teams? Mentors. This theme came through and was very great. Actually, this was very encouraging. It's something that I think our industry does pretty well, and that I think we can continue to do, all of us as game developers. As someone who has participated in a jam, you are set up really well to do this. Offer to mentor. Ask yourself who you're mentoring. Expand your pool to be more diverse. Does every person you're mentoring look like you and come from a background that is very similar to yours? If so, how can you change that? Who else can you help out? Who can you volunteer to help? Sometimes people might say, actually, no, you don't really have the experience I'm looking for in a mentor. Thank you, though. That's fine. Take it and keep going. How can you help? That is what you are asking here. It is not about your ego when you're offering to mentor. Know when to step back. That's when I already kind of got ahead of myself. If you're not the right mentor for someone, help them find someone new. If they say, hey, I really need the experience. For example, I'll speak about myself. I really need the experience of a woman who moved into a lead position. I have specific questions about that. It would be really helpful then for the person I've just said that to say, great, here are some names. Here are some people who would be wonderful to reach out to. If you can help make that connection, that is great. One of the things that I noticed in the research of my book that was really helpful where mentors came at many different seniority levels. You do not have to be a director or a lead to be a useful mentor. In fact, sometimes it's really helpful to be someone who recently broke into the industry, because all of your advice about how to break into the industry is still relevant versus even someone like me who broke in 7 years ago. Some of my advice is outdated. Not all of it, but some of it. And that's important to know. It's important to be honest about that as well, right? And then mentoring is not just reading someone's work, giving them feedback. It's also advocating for them, helping them in meetings, helping people speak up if they need to, at award shows and press and online, mentioning their name, mentioning their work. These are different ways that you can be, even if you're not someone's official mentor, you can continue to honor teams. And like I was saying in the credits, really show the diversity of the people that are working on your products, right? Highlight their work, praise them for it, offer to write recommendation letters. These are all ways that you can help more people succeed in this industry for longer. And then this came up in my research, and I think it is important to address and is important to know going forward and how we want to continue to build our industry. Privilege was big. A lot of the women who are in my book were able to pack up and move cross country for a job. That is not an option for all people. Few of the women in my book had to move between countries. They were, if they were working in the United States, they tended to be from the United States. That is a privilege. Most of them had gone to college at one point or another. That is a privilege. So it's important for us to think about going forward, how can we even the playing field to invite in more voices as we go forward? Remote work, for example, is really great. It allows people who live outside major game dev areas, like LA, Seattle, Austin, people who live outside of those areas to join the industry without having to move to what in some cases are some of the most expensive places to live ever. So this allows them to join the industry without having to uproot their lives in situations where remote work is appropriate. And as we saw during the pandemic, many more roles can be remote than we realized previously. So that is something to think about really seriously, and how that is going to widen the pool of people that you can invite in. Training and internships. Internships are so important, but they do usually require college. So can you offer fellowships and other kinds of training that do not require a college degree to be part of? That is a great way to get past that piece of privilege. What other kinds of trainings can you offer? What other kinds of outreach can you offer that, again, invite in new voices and new artists and new creators who maybe were not able to go to college for whatever reason? So this is the cat picture I promised. Here it is. Here she goes. I have listed here where to find me specifically, because usually in these talks I have a big lengthy Q&A section, but obviously not in this one because it's pre-recorded. But if you have questions for me, I would love to hear them. I would love to talk to you more about your interests and your scholarship and your interest in our culture and how our industry can continue to grow going forward. So this is my website. I'm on Twitter too much. I'm on Instagram as well. I have a plan to be on TikTok at some point. It just isn't happening yet. So any of these places are a great place to find me. They list how to get in touch with me. I would love that. I love to talk to people about the book and the research and the scholarship and the culture of games in general and how exciting it is. What I really want to leave you with here is you're all game developers. And that is so much more than just asset generation and idea generation and core loop generation and coming up with games themselves. You're part of an industry. You are part of a slice of culture. We are building popular culture with every game we make, with every interview we give, with how we talk about the industry and the people who are in it. You can improve that. You can make it healthier. You can make it safer. You can invite more people in, more diverse artists and voices that are going to make more and more creative and interesting and exciting games that you can also play. You can help with that by knowing the history and being able to carry that forward in how you talk about games. And that's it. That is the point of this talk. This is our history, and that is so exciting for where we can go next as devs. Thank you so much for listening. You're the best.
Hi there, my name is Wesley, or Helper Wesley online. I'm the one who makes the tutorial videos and video media for GDevelop. I'm going to start with a quick video about what GDevelop is and why you should be excited to use it. And then when that video is over, I'm going to show a few ways to quickly get started with different kinds of games that you can make with GDevelop. And then I'm going to finish off with a video showing off the best games from last year. So, here are 6 reasons to use GDevelop, the no-code open source game engine that can help you create any 2D game you can imagine, and even some in 3D. The first reason is the no-code system. All of the logic made for your game in GDevelop uses this easy-to-read wording and if-then format, where if the condition is true, then the action will happen, which is just far easier to read and more compact than pages of code. The second reason is because GDevelop is open source. The entire engine can be found, looked through, and downloaded on GitHub. And because it's open source, the base engine is free to use and always will be. There are some online services that you can pay for that will improve the game making experience, but it's not required to jump in and start making your game. The third reason is the built-in behaviors and extensions. Behaviors are prepackaged game logic that you can slot into your game to make mechanics that would otherwise take a long time to make yourself. And the engine comes with a bunch of these pre-installed, like top-down movement, light behaviors, and the physics engine, but you can find over 100 extensions that you can install that were created by other game developers in the community. These range from firing a bullet all the way to allowing gamepad controls. The fourth reason is the built-in asset store and tools. The engine has an asset store full of both free and paid assets, with pre-built objects that you can just directly import into your game, as well as built-in tools like Piskel for image editing and JFXR for creating sound effects. The fifth reason is because you can use the engine anywhere. There are desktop versions for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux, but you can also use the engine through a browser window or even on your mobile phone while you're on the go. And the final reason is the one-click export. So finally, when you're finished building your game, GDevelop handles all of the packaging for you. When you select the type of export you want to do, you can publish the game with a single click. Games exported with GDevelop are then entirely yours. You can publish and sell your game on Steam, or Epic Game Store, or any other storefront you'd like. You can also put ads or in-app purchases in your game and distribute your game on mobile devices. After you finish building your game, it's entirely up to you what you do with it. But do please share it with us on social media. We love to see and share whatever people are making with GDevelop. So when you start using GDevelop, the first screen that you'll see is this Get Started screen. But then we're going to go to the Build menu and have a look at the different projects that we can pick from. Now you could start with a template that you can open up and either build off of or look through to see how the engine works. But we're going to create a project from scratch. I can pick the resolution of the game, as well as the name, where it gets saved, and the name of the folder. And then I can click to optimize for pixel art if I'm making a pixel art game, but I'm not, so I'll leave that unchecked. And then if you're not using a leaderboard, you can turn off allow players to authenticate in-game. Because right now that's mostly what it's used for. And here's a blank project. On the right is the object panel, where I can create a new object from scratch if I want to. I can pick one of these objects and add it into the game. Everything from light to text input to text itself, or 3D models, or joystick controls. There are lots to pick from. Or I can go to the asset store. Where I can search through asset packs to find pre-built objects that I can use for my game. Like I can search for platform, and I can grab from this pack both tiles and a character if I go to the character part of that pack. And then I can place them into the scene. Just by dragging them in. And then to make a platformer game, all I would have to do is go to the behavior section of this object for the player, add the behavior, platformer character, and then press apply. But if I preview this now, you'll see the character just falls down. So instead, I need to also give the platform behavior to this bottom sprite object so that it could be a platform for the platformer character. Here we go. Scale's a bit too big. Now with the arrow keys and spacebar, I can move the character around like a platformer character. So that's one quick start for the game engine. Now you can go into the event sheet for each different scene and add some custom logic to your game. But for now, we're just going to go back to the game scene and use behaviors. So that's a platformer character. Next, I'll look up ships and do something for a top-down view. We can go to the pirate pack and find a piece of land and add that to the game. Now I can add the ship and a couple land masses, and I can go to the properties and change the background to be watercolored. There we go. Now, currently nothing is happening, but if I open the object, go to behaviors, go to add a behavior, I can add the top-down movement behavior to the object. By default, all of these behaviors have some variables that can be toggled or changed. But with the top-down behavior, once it's installed into an object, I can move the object around with the arrow keys. But currently, the ship doesn't interact with the islands at all, so the ship would just go over the island if you tried to go in that direction. So if I go to the event sheet, I can use the action separate objects and select the boat object and the grass and land tile as the object that won't move. And now, every frame, the game will move the boat, the blue ship, away from the grass and sand object. So now if I preview the game, and move the ship over, it can't go through the grass, or the grassy sand tile. Next, we're going to have a look at physics games. So let's find a ball object. Something like this. go to the red ball pack, or the rolling ball pack, so we can get all of these objects from this pack. And we'll grab the red ball, as well as something to interact with. Let's just go with a blue ball and a green square. All right. Now add these into the scene like this. And if I preview the game now, nothing would happen because I haven't changed anything yet. But if I go to add the behavior, again, for the physics object, or physics engine 2.0, I can go in and change things here in the settings, but I'll do that for the next object. So right now it's a dynamic object, so I've given the ball the ability to fall if I preview the game. But nothing else is being interacted with. So if I go into the blue ball object and add that same behavior, but change this one to static and change the shape to a circle, because it is a circle, and then go into the large square, add the same behavior, make this one static as well, so that way it won't move, and now preview the game, the ball is going to fall and interact with the other objects. If I change this back to dynamic, then everything will fall. And that's it. That's physics. Really easy to add into your game. There's also a behavior for draggable physics that I can add to the game, and then with my mouse I can drag the red ball around. Easy as that. And then the last one to have a look at is for 3D models. So GDevelop does have a 3D component to the engine. You can add 3D models, 3D boxes, and other 3D effects to your game, as well as lighting and fog effects. So if I filter the asset store for 3D models, I can find a bunch of these here. And I'll add those to the game, as well as a 3D character. And if I add them into the game, you can see they are indeed 3D models. I can make a gigantic salad. And now, the simplest way to show you how to use the 3D effects in a game is just to go to the build menu and open up a 3D template. There's a few of them in the engine, like this 3D car hunt, first-person game, and 3D bomber bunny. If I open up this template for the 3D first-person game, you can see what's happening. The game has a camera object that's being used as the player. And then when I preview the game, the camera view is coming from that camera. And if you go into the game scene, you can see all the actions and conditions that are going along with that. So for example, the character's movement in the 3D space is happening right here. If the device is not a mobile device, so we're not using these joystick controls, when the W key is pressed, we apply an instant force at the angle the camera is facing at 400 pixels per second. And then the same thing for the other directions when you press the different keys, it's just at a different angle. And you can get to the lighting and fog effects if you go to the layer panel. So we go to the base layer, click on effects, we see the fog and lighting effects right here. And you can add new effects by clicking on this button down here. Now we can change the ambient lighting to a different color. And there we go. Everything has a reddish tint to it. If I go back to the engine and then remove that effect, press apply, and then update, you'll see it going back to normal. So that's 4 different quick setups you can do in GDevelop to get your game started. For more information about how to set up your game with GDevelop, we have a few playlists made on the YouTube channel, like the intro tutorial playlist, and a couple other walkthroughs to make entire games. But now I'll leave you with a couple of videos that I think are really important to see, starting with the optimization video. I know optimization sounds boring, but it's important. If you want your game to run properly, you need to keep some of these things in mind, starting with your events. So here we have the event for the bounce pad. And what the engine is doing every frame is checking these conditions. But it only checks the condition below if the one above it is true, which means if we're just walking around and we're not in collision with one of those objects, then we're only checking one condition every frame. But we have a set of events here that all use the same condition. So even if we're not in collision with that object, we're running that collision check 4 different times. So to optimize this, we're going to add one event up top that has that collision condition in it. And then all of these existing events will be turned into sub-events. And then delete all of their checks for collisions. So now, instead of checking the conditions for 4 different events, we're just checking one. And then if the player is in collision with one of those objects, only then will it check the other conditions. So as you're building your game, try to think about where you can add sub-conditions and combine events to reduce the number of checks the user's computer has to make. And keep in mind that this collision check isn't just checking one thing. It's checking whether the player object is in collision with every other object of that type. And if you had 2 player objects, that would be twice as many checks for a single condition. And then the last thing for events is that the collision condition is actually pretty intense, so use it sparingly. If you can get away with doing something else, do that. Like in this game, to pick up points, instead of using a collision, I'm using distance between 2 points. So when the point gets within a certain distance of the player, it picks it up. So keep that in mind. The next thing that'll impact your performance are the actual objects in your game. So if you have lots of objects that are moving around or are doing something, it's going to be more intense than a bunch of static objects that are just sitting there. Here's a quick test. Every time I click, it's going to spawn 1,000 green bunnies, and they're going to move around the screen and be animated. And if I do this, I can get up to about 25,000 objects before my FPS drops down to about 20. But if I get rid of the event that's moving those bunnies, and stop the looping animation, I can get all the way up to 41,000 objects in scene before I get to that same 20 FPS mark. So just be mindful of what's happening in your game what's moving, what's using events, and things like that. It's also really important to delete or deactivate behaviors on objects that are out of the screen. So if you're making a bullet hell, and your bullets leave the screen, and there's no chance of them finding the player again, then there's no point of them being there. They're just slowing down your game. So try to delete bullets once they've gotten out of screen. And if you don't know how to do that, there's an extension that you can install that will let you check whether an object is still on screen or not. Next, for the objects themselves, is the size of those objects. Be reasonable with the size. Check out the example games in the engine, and you'll see what those games use for the background and the area pieces and the character themselves. Also, you can look up common screen resolutions, pick the one you want to work with, and then don't make any objects bigger than the scene itself. You don't need a background image that's 7,000 pixels by 7,000 pixels. For mobile games, for example, there's really no reason to go beyond 720p. And the final thing for objects in scene is that if you have a giant game scene with lots of little objects, it's better for performance to use tile maps. And it will also be easier to do. And the last section here can actually affect whether or not your game will be allowed on game stores. And that's your file size. Like itch.io, where if your zip file has over 1,000 files in it, it won't be allowed as a web game. And just more generally, if your game files are huge, it's going to take forever to download or load in browser. So for the number of files in your game, there's a quick fix. If you were just carelessly adding objects to your game, and they're just in your game file but not actually being used for the game itself, you can go to Resources, right-click on any object, go to Remove Unused, and click on one of the file types, and it will remove all of those from the project. Then you can create a new folder, and save it inside of that new folder. And you'll have a new folder with just what's in your game. For large images, you can just Google how to compress those. But the next biggest culprit are audio files. For short audio files like sound effects, the .wav format is fine. But you'll want to use AAC for anything longer, like a music file or ambient noise, because those kinds of files are the ones you'll see the real difference with. And then if you plan to export your game to itch as a place to host your game for the jam, this video will really come in handy. Now that we've created a game, we should do a few things before we export it. So we're going to go to the Properties Manager, go to Game Settings, and open up Properties. We're going to give the game the proper name, give it its version number, change its package name, make sure that you're listed as one of or the only author, make sure that you've chosen the right option for how the game should expand in a screen. And of course, for mobile games, you want to make sure that you've chosen your device's orientation. And finally, make sure that you've put in a publisher name. One more thing to do too is to give your game icons. All you have to do is click up here, give it a square image, and it will turn that image into an appropriate size for all the devices. Once that's all done, we can export our game. We go up to File, click on Export, and right now we're given two options: Share with Friends, which will give you a link that you can share with your friends or people that you want to playtest the game, or Publish your game. You can build it manually if you know how, but I'm just going to click on the button that gets the engine to build it for you. We're shown 4 different tabs, starting with the web build, which will create a HTML file that can be played in browser. Next is the mobile export, where you can release an APK to be used on devices generally, or an Android app bundle, which is the kind of bundle that you need to submit a game to Google Play. The next type is for exporting a game to Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. And finally, there's instant games, which are posted to Facebook with a Facebook developer account. Now, GDevelop is free, entirely free to use and export from. But there are restrictions for these automated builds because it costs GDevelop money to host the servers that they're built on. So with GDevelop, you get 2 free builds per day for mobile or desktop. If you pay for a subscription to a GDevelop account, you get more exports per day, but publishing a HTML build is unlimited. So excuse me for breaking the illusion for 1 second. Oh no, I'm on a regular old PC. Okay, so we create a new folder, call it game, or whatever your game is called, go back into the engine, click choose folder, find that folder and select it, and then just press export. So now all of the game's files are in this folder and ready to go. All you have to do is compress it to a zip folder, and that zip folder is your game. So now we go to itch.io, log into your account first of course, bring down the drop-down menu, click upload new project, and then we just fill in the information. Title, game, project URL, game, short description, it's a game, what kind of project it is. I'm going to pick HTML, but you can pick this and also have downloadable versions on the same site. Don't forget to give yourself screenshots and a cover photo. Next we get to uploads. Click upload file, find your zip folder, and then submit it. That will load in, and then you've got some options. You can select what kind of file it is. For a HTML file, we're just going to call this other. Select this file will be played in browser, and then change the viewport dimensions to match the dimensions of your game. And for pretty much every game, I select full screen. And then give it some tags. Ignoring what I just put in there, I do usually put GDevelop in the tags as well. Also, make sure to add GDevelop to your game's metadata. Now down in the community section, you can disable the comments if you don't want your feelings hurt, and then visibility and access determines who gets to actually see the game. If you change it to restricted and give it a password, then you can share your store page with friends and people that get the link, and they'll just need to submit the password to get in. And if you select public, then your page is live, and everyone will be able to find it. I do suggest putting it in restricted first, editing your store page, and then putting it to public. And then finally, to make sure that people can actually play your game, untick both of these boxes. And then press save and view page. That's for a HTML build. But let me quickly show you how to do it for a PC build. So we go to exports, publish to store, make sure that Windows auto installer file is selected, and then just click package. And then you just wait. You'll get this notification here down at the bottom. And if you click that button, you'll get a periodic email that gives you some stats about your game. And if you just click that Windows button there, it will download to your download folder, and then you can go back to itch, edit the game, and click upload file. Tell it that this is an executable file, select for Windows, and then just save it. Now when you view your page, there'll be a download button just above your comments. And then finally, to really show you what kind of games can be made with GDevelop, I want to show you the video that shows all of the best games made with GDevelop from last year. Here are the best games made with GDevelop in 2023. I know that we said this last year, but again this year, a lot happened. There were improvements and changes done to the engine, like 3D integration and object folders, as well as community events and game jams. And so of course, even better games are being made all of the time with GDevelop. Now, this is purely a subjective list of my personal favorite games made with GDevelop that were worked on or released in 2023, starting with games that were part of game expos or contests. And the first game is Katuba's Poacher, which has taken part in a number of game expos in South Korea, and the game not only managed to get fully funded on their local version of Kickstarter, but they managed to raise over 5 times what they were asking for. Next is Stranded on a Raft, which took part in the Philippine Game Dev Expo of 2023, as well as others, and the game has been played over 100,000 times over the course of development across the desktop and mobile version of the game. And then there's the In-Between, a side-scrolling RPG game that managed to win first place in Africa Comicade's ARC Game Pitch Contest. Now let's talk about some games that managed to accrue a large following. Gotcha Story is a fan-made visual novel game with a chibi art style that has been downloaded over 100,000 times on Google Play. Next is Spectrum, a game that was originally created for the third big GDevelop game jam and was the #1 judge's pick that has now been played over 3 million times across the web. Downhill Climb Racing is a side-scrolling hill driving game where you collect coins and try not to crash your vehicle. And this game has been downloaded over 1 million times on Google Play. Wise Letters is an educational mobile game designed to teach children to spell. And the game is definitely doing a lot of good because it's been downloaded over 100,000 times. And the last is Map of Air Alarms of Ukraine, which has been downloaded over 100,000 times, and it isn't technically a game, but it's a very important app for those who need it. It shows which districts or regions in Ukraine are currently under alert, along with information about the type of alert and its duration. Now let's show off some GDevelop games on Steam. Starting with Bullet Bunny. Set to release in Q1 of 2024, Bullet Bunny is an intense twin-stick shooter bullet hell game with Vampire Survivor mechanics. Bullet Bunny took part in Steam's Summer Next Fest 2023, as well as this year's Shmup Festival. Next is Swirl Watch, a tactical stealth roguelite game that was released way back in April and still maintains a 100% positive review score. Then there's Spent Shells, a game set to release in Q2 of 2024 that is a top-down roguelike inspired by great indie games like Nuclear Throne, The Binding of Isaac, and Ravita. Escape from Demon Island is a top-down game inspired by Vampire Survivors that was released on Steam back in July. Gods from the Abyss, a beat-em-up game with co-op gameplay and a Lovecraftian theme, whose demo has been played over 20,000 times. Now for some miscellaneous achievements. Starting with Examinations of Fear, which became a YouTube sensation in the analog horror scene and has been played by hundreds of YouTubers and seen by thousands of viewers. Next is a fan game called Theorists that was made for and eventually wound up in the hands of the game theorist MatPat, and was played live for hundreds of thousands of people on their side channel GT Live. Then there's the game The Boys El Patriota, created by Slumber Party Games, who were commissioned to create an official promotional game for Prime Video's The Boys. Then there's Falta de Atenção, or Lack of Attention, from the same creator as the hit game Vai Juliette, which is a game released in collaboration with the newest album from the Brazilian singer Juliette. Now for some Game Jam games, starting with Void, a game created for Bracky's Game Jam 2023.2, which is a well-crafted FMV puzzle story game that managed to place in the top 3% of the over 900 games submitted to the jam. The Haunted Dungeon, a game made in just 2 days for the Kenny Jam 2023, which is a creepy horror exploration game that placed in the top 2% of the 450 games submitted to the jam. Static Echoes, a game submitted to this year's Scream Jam, placed 12th out of the almost 500 games submitted, and was picked as one of the host's favorite games. Gentai Shooter, an arcade-style bullet hell game featuring multiple weapons and characters, landed in the top 8% in the Bullet Hell Jam of 2023. Then there's Switch Puzzle, a level-based puzzle game where you control the character with switches to comply with the theme of on or off, and the game came in second place in GDevelop's 4th big game jam. And lastly is Power Lines, a 2D puzzle platformer game where your characters are connected by a power line. This game was submitted to Vim Jam 4 and came in first place out of the 600 people who joined the jam. Now let's show off some 3D games made with GDevelop. Starting with Kings of Rhythm, a linear story side-scroller game that was originally created for a GDevelop game jam, but has been worked on since to further flesh out the game. Then there's Web Arcade Builder, a game hosting game where you're able to build and design your own arcade space, and then load games in from the web to play through the game cabinets. Then there's Logic Bulb Adventure, a game where the player switches between a 2D handheld console and the 3D world in order to solve logic gate-based puzzles. And then Nightfall, a low-poly style 3D RPG that's being developed to include combat in a 3D space. And then lastly, there's a currently unnamed game that's being developed. It's inspired by games like XCOM and Eye of the Beholder, and so the game is a 3D turn-based dungeon crawler that uses 2D sprites in a 3D environment. And now let's just speedrun some honorable mentions here at the end. Error Vacui Preludium, a sci-fi point-and-click mystery game. Sprout Island, a top-down farming sim. Last Toll, a tower defense brawler. It's Not You, It's Me, a story-driven platformer game. Sticky Keys, a platformer puzzle game that features a slime. Treasure Quest 3D, Golden Voyage, a 3D treasure hunting game. Sunny's Delivery Service, a 3D fetch quest game. Bottle Shooting, a physics-based knock 'em down game. Galactic, an arcade-style space shooter. And finally, Pumpkin Detective, a turn-based card battler. These have been the best games made with GDevelop in 2023. I hope you enjoyed that list, and that it inspires you to create your own game. And then if you do, maybe next year we'll be showing off something you made.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Global Game Jam. Again, my name is Marcos. I'm the marketing lead at GDevelop. With me, the one and only helper, Wesley. Wesley,
Hello
how are
there.
you?
Hi there.
Hi. So yeah, we just wanted to say hi, introduce ourselves, introduce our engine to the audience. We're really excited that this year GDevelop is an official promotional partner. We're going to have our mainline Global Game Jam site as well as a Global Game Jam Next site that is going to be coming out really soon that you're going to be able to join. And so that's going to be for people aged 13 to 17. And then our mainline site is going to be for basically everybody else. This is open to everyone around the world. Us is the engine, which is free and open source for everybody to use, as Wesley's very helpful video has shown. So we're really happy to be here. We're extremely happy to be a bigger part of Global Game Jam this year, and we're hoping to be a bigger part next year. But for now, we're focusing on 2024, and we hope to see you all in the site, actually, because we have one for younger people and one for older people. Wesley, is there anything that I'm missing? Do you think is there any more information we should be giving these lovely people?
Sorry. Really quickly, I wanted to respond to Charlie's question there. The most innovative feature in GDevelop, in my opinion, is just the no-code system in general, where it kind of translates JavaScript into a more naturally read language. It was covered a little bit in the video, but if you check our videos on YouTube, you'll find a lot more information about that. It makes it really easy to jump right in despite not knowing how to code yourself.
I would have to agree. For me, the visual, and this is also proven, it's not just me or you saying this. We have a lot of testimonials from people who are not necessarily game designers or programmers using GDevelop in places like design schools or teaching children how to make games, but also people making games like you mentioned in your video for companies like Prime Video. So the fact that people without a technical background can still make successful games using GDevelop is probably, yeah, the biggest thing. Accessibility, and also just how much you can get done with the free tier. I think it's important to note as well, because there are no restrictions really on platforms you can export to. For example, you can create a build for Android without paying a single cent or having your own local build environment, which is a little bit different than perhaps other options out there. So the distance from prototype to publish game is very short, and you don't need to go elsewhere to sort of repackage. For example, back in the day, we used to use Cocoon as a packager for HTML5 games into APKs, but that's no longer the case. So for me as a game developer, that's been really easy to iterate on my games and have them deployed on many platforms. Cool question, though. Let's see if we have any more questions. I think we are good, right?
I think so. I didn't see any more during the presentation.
Excellent. So yeah, GDevelop is very self-explanatory, and Global Game Jam is as well. It's the biggest game jam in the world, and we're super excited to be a part of it. If y'all have any more questions, we're gonna be, like I said, hosting our own sites. Our mainline site is already live. It will be hosted on our Discord server. So if you want to join us, we have, how many people do we have, Wesley? Over like 10,000 people on the Discord server already?
Somewhere around that number. I'm not entirely sure specifically.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of people, and it's a lot of friendly people, which is very important. So if you want to join us over there, talk about game development, and then for people under the age of 18, we're gonna have our Game Jam, Global Game Jam Next site live pretty soon. But in the meantime, thanks again to Global Game Jam, everybody at the organization, Tim, Charlie, Richard, Taria, everybody has been so kind. So we're extremely thankful to be here. Wesley, any last words?
No, that was pretty much it from me. I just want to say good luck to everybody and hopefully have a lot of fun.
Yep, same for me. Oh, there's Tim. Hi, Tim.
Yeah, I was wondering, I just had a couple of questions. I was wondering, like how can people connect with you all? Like, do you have a community already online for people to like connect with other GDevelop developers?
Oh, definitely, yeah. We have mostly our Discord servers where most of our community hangs out, but we also have a Reddit thread, if they're called threads, Reddit, a subreddit, and our own YouTube channel, which has its community posts, and we're always on Twitter and all the different socials. You can access all of those from our main site. They're all listed there. But I think most of our community is kind of concentrated in Discord right now.
And we're very active as well. It's not like we're just like a hands-off type corporate company. Like everybody in the team is very active, replying to stuff. You know, we're very excited to see what people are working on with GDevelop. So we're usually people's number one fans when it comes to their games. So yeah, they can definitely find us there and have a quick chat with us.
That's great. I think you all, I mean, when we first met, you mentioned having a history with Global Game Jam too. I think people would be interested in hearing about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was me personally. So like I said, my name is Marcos. Before I joined, actually, while I was in the process of joining GDevelop, I was also an IGDA director here in Paraguay. So I was part of the board of directors for the International Game Developers Association here in Paraguay. So I worked for 2 years during the pandemic organizing events, mostly online, obviously. One of those was the Global Game Jam. We also organized online meets and eventually in-person meets with people like Rami Ismail. We got him to fly all the way to Paraguay for a conference, which was pretty cool. So yeah, and usually because of the language barrier that sometimes exists, I act as a translator, interpreter for local developers to communicate with people like Rami, or for the community to interact among themselves. So it's been really cool to come from that side of the organization to now be in a company and be a partner. It's sort of coming full circle for me, so I'm super happy about it. A little bit emotional because that's just the Latino in me.
No, I get it. I'm glad to have you as a part of it. Charlie has another good question: is are you able to upload your own art in GDevelop? Create and upload your own.
Yes,
Leslie?
yes, you definitely are. What I showed in the video was the asset store, because that's really the quickest way to get up and running. In the asset store, it's all the objects are already made. So if you have a sprite which with all its different animations, it's already set up and organized for you. So it's really quick to jump in and do that. But if you want to use your own art and make your own style, you can use the pre-built objects. Sorry, you can create new objects from scratch, and all of the objects are there in that list, from sprites to light objects to particles and all that stuff. So you can use all of your own art as well for that.
That's great. What platforms does, like, when you build your game from GDevelop, is it only PC at this point, or can you run it on other devices?
Ooh. Can I take that one, because that's my favorite thing about it.
So.
Yeah. It's actually everything, pretty much everything except consoles at this point. And we have one-click builds for mostly everything as well, even in the free account. So if you're making your game within GDevelop, you're just one click away from producing something like an APK that you can then just upload through the Google Play Store developer console and have that on Google Play. And we have many developers publishing on the Play Store, and downloads up to over 1 million downloads for some of these games. So, and that's without creating a local build environment, which to me was a big selling point of GDevelop, but also as a developer myself. Back when I published my first game in 2016, it was very difficult to have a game made in a single engine and then exported into everything. Like, you needed to have a different build environment for PC. You needed to have a different environment for, like, you used to use Android Studio and stuff like that to publish to Android, but now everything's baked in and you're just one click away from getting your APK or your .exe or even Linux packages. So it's probably one of my favorite features. Yeah,
that's great. I started my time in games on the IT side of things and managed a lot of build servers and build farms. So not having that to deal with is definitely a big thing, especially for small developers, indies, and anyone really, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really helps with the iteration process as well, because you can test on real hardware so much faster, because you can just one click publish and build. And for example, a regular Android build takes less than a minute to compile and export out an APK. So it's not like you're waiting ages for stuff to compile either. This is running on state-of-the-art servers, so it's pretty quick.
Nice. If I remember right, GDevelop's fairly early in development itself, right? Like, are there any new features that you are working on that you're excited about, or?
Well, it's been going since 20. It depends on when you start counting, but it's been at least a decade and a half or so of development since Florian started the project. But it's been over the past 3 years or so that Florian Rival, our CEO, created a company around the project, which is open source, and has been hiring people like myself and Wesley. So we're definitely working on many features. I work on the promotional side, and I get to do stuff like this and talk to you lovely people. Wesley is working on stuff like tutorials all the time, but the engineers are working on features constantly. We recently added 3D capabilities to GDevelop, which is something that we're going to be expanding upon as well. And we're looking very close to finishing stuff like cloud collaboration for projects. We're constantly improving the UI and the user experience within the engine. But really, our focus is right now, obviously growing, but also addressing the specific needs of people who are using the engine. Because we can make a feature that is super flashy and that is going to attract a lot of people, but then if it's not polished and it's not what people really need to make games successfully, then it's a bit of a marketing exercise without much meaning, So we're really focused on polishing the features that professional developers need, and that's been really paying off, as you were able to see in the reel. Like the past year specifically has been immense in the sense of growth.
Yeah, it was really impressive to see all the different genres and different art styles and things that people were able to make with the engine.
Yeah, there was one point where people would say that GDevelop was a platformer game engine, and my heart kind of sunk. And so I've been really trying to push as many like top down and puzzle games and all these other things, because you can make platformer games, like if you saw in the video, really quickly, but there's other things you can do as well with it. So yeah, it's very diverse.
And funnily enough, the most successful things, correct me if I'm wrong, Leslie, but they're not actually platformers.
No. Yeah. Most of the successful games are like top down or puzzle games. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question and then I just lost it. But so the past year, a lot of things have happened that made people consider switching to a different game engine. I'm wondering, like, what do you think is like the strongest selling point for people who are thinking about it to maybe switch over to GDevelop as their engine of choice?
To me, first off, it's free to start, and like we have people creating commercially successful games with a free tier, so you don't lose anything. And also, we've had both in-house and independent studies that you can find on our website and on pages like Reddit or GitHub, where people see the development time starting from scratch of making this game with GDevelop and then making it with another engine. And they made the game in like 8 hours with GDevelop, and the same game took them like 35 in another engine. So if you're looking to make a game and spend the least amount of time possible fighting the tool that you're working with, like trying to figure out the tool that you're working with, then GDevelop is for you, because our main objective with GDevelop is accessibility. So we get out of the way so that you can focus on making the games. And there's nothing wrong with learning, the hard way. I started programming websites on Notepad with a HTML raw, and that was super fun, and it taught me a lot, but it was very slow going. So I wish I had like something like WordPress back 25 years ago when I started. And similarly, I think people who started game development 25 years ago are going to see something like GDevelop, and they're going to be like, I wish I had something like that, so I didn't have to start writing my own game engine from scratch, or, programming every single, character movement from scratch, because it's not needed. You don't need to reinvent the wheel if you don't want to. You can just grab a wheel.
Yeah, I actually did one of those YouTube challenge videos where they try to make a game really, really, really quickly. And I made a game in 20 minutes, one of those drop fall games where things fall down. And a bunch of the comments on the video were, in Unreal, it would take me, that amount of time to get the project set up.
Right.
not finish it, but get it set up.
And we love Unreal, by the way. This is not a dig on Unreal.
No, Unreal's great.
Reality,
we couldn't dream of having any kind of photorealism the way Unreal does. And I personally used to use it. The blueprint system is great, but
Yeah.
the iteration time for specific use cases is so much shorter with GDevelop that if it falls within the category of stuff that you want to create, I honestly, and I say this because I joined GDevelop because I like the project and not the other way around. So if the project fits GDevelop, there is no better tool than GDevelop to do it. Simple as. And I know that's sort of my job to say that, but I truly do believe that if it falls within what GDevelop can do, there's no better way to do it. There's no better tool to do it than GDevelop, which is cool. It's cool for me to work on something that I'm passionate about, and I think Wesley feels the same way.
Oh, most definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I get
Also,
that.
not biased, right? Not biased.
No. Hashtag not biased.
Right. Yeah, setting up a dev environment is a big time sink usually in game jam. So if you can get up and running on GDevelop fast and just start making stuff, that'll help a lot of people, I think. And definitely
that's
people who are
definitely
coming to the jam for their first time and maybe have never even made a game before.
Yeah.
And it's not just the time sink, like people, you need to have the hardware as well, right? And a lot of our developers are working just on a Chromebook because you can just run GDevelop in the browser and export APKs from your browser. Like that's that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we have some good, Florian mentioned in the chat that, he just released 3D support less than a year ago, and expect a lot more features related to that, as well as more online services. Some other folks are saying there's way more tutorials now than there were 18 months ago, and it's easy to use and really fast to prototype and iterate. And
definitely.
For graphic designers and artists who perhaps don't have a code background. Some of the comments.
Yeah. I had my 10-year-old nephew making games with me, which was a really fun experience. I had to say.
Oh, nice.
It's very, very easy to do because it gets translated from JavaScript to our no code kind of interface. And so he could just read it, and it was all, easy for him to just jump in and go for it.
Yeah, that's great to hear. We have people who bring their kids to the gym and work with them on making games. So having an easy to use engine would be definitely something they'd be interested in.
Oh, yeah.
And that's also why we were so excited to join Next, right? Global Game Jam Next, because our focus is on accessibility, and we do have a proven track record of being used in schools for children as young as 6 years old up to university students and professional developers. So we're really excited to see what the younger generation can do when they have access to this kind of tools from the get-go, when they don't have to fight for them,
exactly.
When it's just there, and they don't have to worry about it. They can get on with using their imagination to create whatever it is that they're dreaming about. That's what's exciting for me.
Are there resources available for educators, like lessons or curriculum that they can follow, or is it just easy to follow the tutorials? Or
funnily enough, we do have the tutorials, but we are working, and this is maybe breaking news here at Global Game Jam, but we do have some hours already put into developing an in-house curriculum that we're going to be hopefully releasing in the next month or two. And then we're going to expand on that later on in the year. So teachers who decide to use GDevelop will have in-house resources to do so.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, I run a games and education meetup here up in Seattle where I'm based, and I'm sure a lot of the educators would be excited to hear about that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I used to teach school kids, so I'm using a little bit of that experience as well as borrowing from other people in the team. And we're a few lessons into the official curriculum already. I was sharing it earlier today with Wesley, who seems excited about it as well. So coming soon.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely look forward to that. Any last bits of advice you want to give to people out there getting ready for Global Game Jam who are thinking about using GDevelop?
Wesley?
Well, for game jams in general, don't think Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
Create the first level of Mario, stick with it, make it really nice. Don't make Final Fantasy. That's my advice for a game jam right there.
That's actually very good. Yeah. My advice would be try and make it social if you can, particularly because the site is online. I think it's very easy for us to sort of hold ourselves into our cocoon. And I think having a social experience is such a key part of what makes Global Game Jam what it is. So I really hope that people find new folks to collaborate on our site and get out of their shell. And people, I've known people who have met on game jams who went on to collaborate, creating fantastic games. And it's and not just creating games, but also just being friends. Getting together on a weekend playing Mario Kart, because you are just joining a community of like-minded people. You don't have to be ashamed of being the nerd in the group. Everybody's the nerd in the group. The group is the nerd.
Right.
Yeah, let's embrace that and let's be social and nice to each other.
Yeah, that's a great sentiment to end on. Be nice to each other, have fun. Thanks, Marcus and Wesley, and hope you all have a great time at your jam site. Looking forward to hearing about it.
Thank you so much, Tim. Wesley?
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I'm very much looking forward to this new experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Here are 6 reasons to use GDevelop, the no-code open source game engine that can help you create any 2D game you can imagine, and even some in 3D. The first reason is the no-code system. All of the logic made for your game in GDevelop uses this easy-to-read wording and if-then format, where if the condition is true, then the action will happen, which is just far easier to read and more compact than pages of code. The second reason is because GDevelop is open source. The entire engine can be found, looked through, and downloaded on GitHub. And because it's open source, the base engine is free to use and always will be. There are some online services that you can pay for that will improve the game making experience, but it's not required to jump in and start making your game. The third reason is the built-in behaviors and extensions. Behaviors are prepackaged game logic that you can slot into your game to make mechanics that would otherwise take a long time to make yourself. And the engine comes with a bunch of these pre-installed, like top-down movement, light behaviors, and the physics engine. But you can find over 100 extensions that you can install that were created by other game developers in the community. These range from firing a bullet all the way to allowing gamepad controls. The fourth reason is the built-in asset store and tools. The engine has an asset store full of both free and paid assets, with pre-built objects that you can just directly import into your game, as well as built-in tools like Piskel for image editing and JFXR for creating sound effects. The fifth reason is because you can use the engine anywhere. There are desktop versions for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux, but you can also use the engine through a browser window or even on your mobile phone while you're on the go. And the final reason is the one-click export. So finally, when you're finished building your game, GDevelop handles all of the packaging for you. When you select the type of export you want to do, you can publish the game with a single click. Games exported with GDevelop are then entirely yours. You can publish and sell your game on Steam, or Epic Game Store, or any other storefront you'd like. You can also put ads or in-app purchases in your game and distribute your game on mobile devices. After you finish building your game, it's entirely up to you what you do with it. But do please share it with us on social media. We love to see and share whatever people are making with GDevelop.
Welcome. In this workshop, I'm going to talk a bit about basics of Houdini for game jams. So I try to keep like a perspective of trying to keep things simple for game jams. So generating like simple constructions and showing you some of the basics that we can use Houdini in certain game engines, which you will see a bit more about, of course. I'm Simon Verstraeten, and I will be showing you some of these elements to make things a bit more faster, or hopefully a bit more automated to make things better and faster. Now, what I want to talk about today is a quick overview here. So I'm going to start with the basic presentation. Then I want to talk about Houdini basics, just in case for people who are new. I'm going to keep this quite basic. Then once we have some of the basics, let's talk a bit about like simple workflows. Like how can we make something simple and export that into a game engine? To make things a bit more interesting, we can then go into like scattering assets, instancing, things like that, because it's very interesting to maybe have systems to instance and scatter around elements in a scene. Houdini Engine will also be very useful here as well, which if you don't know about Houdini Engine, I will talk a bit here in a moment about it. And to finish off our workshop here, I want to talk a bit about the Game Jam Toolkit, which is a good toolkit for you available. You can already download this and try this out for yourself, which includes some basic Houdini tools, which you can break down, look into, modify. You can just try it as this, and so on. Well, if you have probably seen like previous presentations about Houdini, then you roughly know what Houdini is. So just quickly recapping some of the things is, it's a 3D software package where we can do our modeling, animation, simulations, a variety of things. What makes Houdini a bit more special is it's a node-based system. So everything we do is going to be node-based, like you can see here on the screen. We make a box, we do an extrusion, we do a bevel on that. It's all going to be node-based. What is interesting with this setup is that this will make things a bit more procedurally. So that means that we can link values together. We can make an algorithm or a recipe that can define how an extrude node should behave or how a bevel node should bevel things. So we can do a lot of customization on these nodes. There is so much flexibility and control in some of these nodes that we can really make a decision on how something should happen in a network. So that's roughly what Houdini is, just node-based procedural setups. Houdini before has been quite popular in film with like its simulation options, but we want to of course use it in games, so let's talk about some examples as well. So in the game industry, there are a variety of usage. For example, large-scale scenes. As soon as we talk about open world scenes, Houdini is quite popular in this. Also optimization. Making a game requires optimization. So if this is again talking about like large-scale things, Houdini is also great for that. If you need to run over a couple thousands of assets and reduce them, make LODs, check the light maps or something like that, Houdini would be great to do that process all automatically and procedurally. VFX is also very useful here. Like I mentioned, Houdini is quite known in film for doing all kinds of complicated simulations. And we can now also bring that into a game. There are some nice ways to simplify effects and breaking them down into more real-time solutions. And finally, there's also in-engine tools. So this is what actually Houdini Engine is, which I'll talk about in a moment, where we can have Houdini inside of Unreal or Unity, for example. Now, so known examples here. I'm only going to pick a few. There are many more you can find. So here is Far Cry 5. If you have played Far Cry 5 or you're familiar with the series, they are often open world games. So they were interested in finding a way to make or generate open worlds. So they have a lot of forest scenes. So they generated that with Houdini. Like, for example, like why would I place every tree or bush or grass manually? There should be some form of tool that knows how to place certain models. So we don't have to manually do that. Another example here is Horizon Zero Dawn from Guerrilla Games. They made a tool here in this example for the water systems. So on the terrain, they want to maybe manually or automatically find a way to make these water flowing down from terrain. So they have a Houdini system that calculates the geometry for the water, but also like carves in the terrain to create a reaction from the water. Also, a lot of these examples I'm showing here are from talks and videos that you can find. So if you were to Google Far Cry 5 or Horizon Zero Dawn with Houdini, there's maybe more information there as well. Same for Spider-Man here. It's from a GDC talk. So Spider-Man is an open world game. So again, we need something that is capable of scaling things. So with Houdini, they were able to generate the buildings. There are probably a couple thousand buildings in the game. So how can we now do this more automatically? So Houdini was here a great way of doing that by instancing the modular props or kits that they had to make sure that they can cover a variety of buildings automatically, and also being able to iterate way faster if something needs to change. Now, a little bit about Houdini Engine. Like I said, we have options to have our Houdini tools inside of a game engine. So this is what Houdini Engine is. It's basically a plugin that you install for Unreal or Unity, and you can then open a Houdini file, which we will also use today. It's usually used for things like making geometry, setting instances, or making terrain, or even all at once. There are many more use cases of this, but those are like pretty common ones. So we can, for example, generate a terrain in Houdini. We can calculate where instancing of certain props are. And then we can also maybe generate new rocks or cliffs or something. We can all make that in one single tool and send it to this plugin to Unreal or Unity to have it like fully scaled up into scene. Another example here is this quick level builder tool that I made a while ago. So based on boxes, you will define how your building shape would look like. So we're going to make basic boxes, define, for example, like a roofing space here. And in a moment, you will see that I will drag in my Houdini tool and I will assign those boxes to my tool so it knows where to place the assets. And I will then pick a wall or a roof piece and place it in the right position. So it just does that for you. Adding additional boxes could, for example, mean adding like a supporting beam structure, for example. So it leaves a lot of like openness and iteration speed for the user. By changing these boxes or shapes, we can change the building. If we want to make it bigger, smaller, we can now quickly do that. So since we talk about like Game Jam and Houdini, Houdini has been used in previous Game Jams. Side Effects themselves have been sponsoring many Game Jams before, and Houdini was often used as well to make some of the games. So here are some examples as well. I think it is quite useful to know about. So here is from a game called Sir Steckums. So they were being able to generate platforms, for example, like they have a curve, they can draw the curve, and then they have a platform. You can do many things with this, like already like scatter some assets or other things, but it's very useful to now have a bit more faster iteration speed on like level design. If everything is based on a curve, you can just quickly draw different shapes and find out what the best shape is for your level. Another one is Picnic Panic. So it's sort of right in the word, like they have some picnic idea where they needed a lot of like different fruits and foods, which is also made in Houdini. As you can see here, one of the dragon fruits made with Houdini. And one more example that I wanted to show is Totally Unexpected Safety Drill, where they needed like some sort of like level building tool. So they quickly wanted to, again, like sketch out a level or a scene. So they have a tool for this in Houdini where they could plug in simple shapes and it will just make up the level for them. And then this will then be used in Unity to then make further their game. So they have like now very quickly iteration speed and also the ability to make many levels on a short time because they have a tool ready to go basically to generate something. And that's actually used in many cases here. So those were some Game Jam examples. There are many more. Just picked out a few ones that I've seen over the years, but there are definitely a couple more that could be interesting. So now with all that said, I want to jump into Houdini and talk a bit about how we can build some of these things as well. So when you first open Houdini, probably going to look something like this. So here we have our 2D viewport. We can also enable quickly the grid here. So here, if I just click on this, we will have our 3D viewport. Further down here, we have our node network, where we're gonna, in a moment, place nodes. So by just pressing the tab menu, we can then have the option to place nodes. the parameters of the nodes will be appearing above it in this parameter interface. Then this is like the most menus you will use, so the viewport and the nodes menus. And then above it, we have then the shelf tools, which are like pre-made options for you, but often we can also just hide it here on the side to get a bit more room. Same with the timeline. If you don't necessarily need the timeline, we can also just quickly hide it here as well. So we have a bit more room in a moment when we start to build different nodes and structures. Now, a couple other things to know about is here we have our basic tools here on the side. So different handles for rotation, moving. This is going to be our main handle, which is actually the important handle that I most of the time will probably use. This is the most important handle. And on the other side, we then have options here, for example, for lightning. You can also just here enable or disable the grid in case you want that. Then there is some additional information. If you want to see the points or the point numbers or primitive numbers, you can find this here as well, which is useful. I'm not going to talk about this too much, but it's interesting that you know if you want to see like the normals of a model or something like that, we can enable here the displays normals, for example, if you want to double check the normal of a model and so on. Further, we can also here change the shading of a model. If you're interested in like having certain shading or matte caps, you can quickly adjust that as well. Now, in terms of then actually building something, we can here press in our object network or node network tab. And what is going to be important to understand with Houdini is the types of layers and networks we have. So if you want to make some geometry, of course, we want to go and here type in geometry. So this means that we're going to go in a geometry layer. So if I double click on this node, we will now here go to a geometry scene or layer. If I go back here to object, you can see that we are switching now back to an object layer. That's one of the first things understanding about Houdini is there are multiple layers and each layer has a different context. So a geometry layer has things like beveling, unwrapping, poly reducing. An object layer doesn't have these things because it's just a collection of your objects. So that's important to understand. For example, if I want to render something, we're going to make a ROP network, which stands for rendering operation. So here, this is a network, especially here for rendering and making outputs. So what we're going to mainly use today is the geometry layer. So it doesn't matter too much if you don't get this fully yet or are not interested in other networks. What we're mainly going to work with is, of course, geometry. We want to create geometry because I want to make a rock generator or I want to make something else, a tree, a house, setting instances, making terrain. These are all geometry things. These can be all done here in our geometry level. So to get started, for example, let's, for example, have a sphere. So tab, sphere, and here we're going to create our basic sphere. So in our viewport, we have our sphere as well. If you have that handle on here, you will see like also a bounding box, which we can use to quickly scale and change the sphere. If you want that, I'm just going to Control Z this, but we can also keep just the base shape. Then for each node, like I said, we will have then also parameters as well. So here we have the parameters for this node. So in this case of this sphere, maybe let's set this to polygon. So it's like a triangle sphere. So it's equally triangulated. And I want to do some, let's say like rock generation, some very rough rock generation. And we're going to change the frequency to, let's say 50. So we have a quite high density. And this will then be my base for example, for a rock generator. So once we have a base shape, how can we, for example, displace or move models around? So we can use something which is called a mountain node. And this will basically add a noise on the point. So here it will, if you plug in, you will see that by default, it will start to displace the model, as you can see. So we want to now go over here in the settings and play around with this. What is mainly interesting for us is here the noise value, which will basically control a bit the strength. So the amplitude here will control some of the strength. And the second part is then the pattern, the actual noising of the shape. So what are some interesting types of noise? So maybe let's increase our amplitude a bit and let's talk a bit about the noise types. So here we have a bunch of different noises. We can, for example, go here like again to Perlin noise, which is quite simple. But you can see like there is some additional noise on top of this. So if you know what a Berlin noise is, you will see that in this case, there's like some additional noising on this. This actually comes from here, from the fractal tab. So here, this will actually add like an additional type of noise. So here for now, let's maybe disable this. And this looks more like a Berlin noise, like we would expect. So we can always come back later and add an additional noise if you want to, depending on the style. If you want to go with something stylized, you probably don't want to have like a finer noise, right? So going here to another noise type, what is more interesting are, for example, whirling noises, Manhattan noise, or the other one. So here, let's take, for example, this one. Maybe let's lower intensity, and you can see that this already looks really cool, like a sort of like rock or crystal shapes. So this works already really well. Let's try the other ones. So here again, this also feels some like a rock shape. So you have to sometimes play around with like the intensity to maybe get the feeling. But let's quickly go to some other noises. Here are some other great shapes you could use. Let's maybe go with some other shapes. So you can see quite interesting shapes and noises we have by default. So let's take the first one, Worley. I like this one. This gives a quite simplistic shape and look. And we can then here, as I said, like play around with this. Maybe don't push this too far. We can also here go with element size and offset. So the sizing will be stuff like the scaling of the noise. So if we put this lower, it will be more frequent. So usually like around 1 is actually pretty good. And also offsetting means that we just basically having a seed or variation or randomness in it. So every time I want a new one, I will basically change the offset, right? So here we have that shape. And what we could do with this is nothing is holding us back to maybe add an additional mountain, for example. So if we do an additional mountain on this, we will basically now add more noise on top of this. So again, we have to be careful with like our intensity that we give this. So it can be either very subtle, or again, it could be that we disable here the fracture, the fractal, and also maybe, for example, using something else. And you can see that sometimes this might not work fully yet together. So to make this better work, I would recommend going here and change this to positive, which means that it will the range output will always be positive value. So 0 centered means that it can also go negative, which means it will go inward, which can sometimes cause issues. So in this case, the positive works really well. And for now, we can also then easily change this. So we can add a subtle like second noising, as you can see, of that Worley shape. So in case you want that to maybe break up the shape a bit more, we can have something that like breaks it up even a bit more. So this is a base setup for a rock generator. Of course, this is not perfect. There is many things you can do here. But to keep going, another thing to make this in game engine is to probably do a poly reducing step. The only reason why you maybe can keep it on a higher poly count, maybe if you use nanite for the game jam, then you can throw a couple higher poly counts at it. But we often just want to go and check our poly count here, and we're going to go with a poly reduction. So you can see it will just reduce poly count. So by default, it will often do like a decent job. So if this is like a sort of like smaller pebble or rock in the scene, this will be good. And also another interesting setting here as well is continuing to reduce without losing quality. If you enable this, it will reduce the rock by default based on a certain quality tolerance. So here I will reduce the rock to around 3000 primitives. If I don't do my extrusion, if I don't do my poly reducing nut, the default was 50,000. So we can see that by enabling this toggle, it will do an automatic reducing until it feels like it's enough to go to that tolerance value. But in case you want to like manually reduce it, feel free to like manually override this. We can also set this to output specific commands. Let's say, you know, your budget is 2000 or 1000. We can fill in that number and it will aim for that number to be as output. So that's like poly reducing, very useful now to quickly reduce elements. There are some nice features here as well to reduce your poly counts. Now, continuing with this, let's say I'm happy with my result, and we of course want to have some UVing. So we're going to keep it simple and using the auto UV. So this is from the side effects lab tools. So if you don't know what these are, if you're not familiar with this, I can recommend checking them out, of course. They're having a useful tool set available for free that you can use. So in this case, automatic unwrapping. So this is the default values. If we quickly go to our UV space, you can also change it over here. This is the default value, looks okay, but you can always like play around with other values in case you feel like other types might be better. So it's up to you on what you choose. Then we can go back. Then let's go back to our view here. So we have our UV. Another thing we can of course do is setting normals. In case you don't have any normals here by default, might be good reason to set it ourselves. So we can go with like the default of an angle of 60. You can go a bit lower depending on how you feel about this. Since it's a rock shape, we can probably go a bit lower. As you can see, we'll just make the rock shapes a bit more harder. So that can be nice if you would look this from like a bit more of a distance. You will be able to like recognize the rock faces a bit better. So from here, what you can do now is you can just use an FBX exporting node. So this is a simple like workflow. So here we can fill in a location where we want to save this. We can click on save to that location and it will be stored there. There is some additional settings here as well to if you want to export in this ASCII format. Sometimes you want to disable this and also as well converting units because there is a difference between Houdini, Unity, and Unreal. They have like different scaling units. So usually I would probably take this on. Otherwise, you might need to scale things up. So that's always good to know. And there are some other settings here as well. But what you mainly need to know is like here is the path. Then you click save to disk, and you have a basic FBX exporting now. So this is a simple Houdini workflow overview, I would say. So we created a base mesh. We created a certain logic for creating shapes. In this case, I just mainly used noises to create a rock. Then we did some like optimizing and like default things you would do for games is of like adding UV, adding normal, and then you can use an FBX ROP exporter. So this is a basic setup to use. Nothing super fancy, but also like very useful. I can now quickly generate a couple of rocks in minutes just by going back to the noise, going here, for example, to the offset, and changing the offset means that we will change different rock shapes. So in case you need like 20 different rocks, you can quickly now do that here by just playing around with the settings. Now going a bit into the next part that I also want to mention here is looking a bit closer at what exactly we have currently made. So we created the base shape, which is nothing too special. And then we used a mountain node, which is actually under the hood called an attribute noise. As you can see, it's called an attribute noise node. So what does this mean is that it will actually create a noise value and it will multiply this by the position. So here in our parameter, we can see that we are here using P. So P stands for the position of the points, and it will basically then multiply the noise by position, which of course will be a displacement. So we can also view the noise by clicking this icon here, which will, as you can see, like try to view the noise. So which in this case might not be the best as a visualizer, but let's maybe create like a new sphere. So we can create a new sphere, or if you want to have another shape, go ahead, like a box. Feel free to try other shapes. So we can have a new sphere. We can again set this to polygon and maybe increase the frequency a bit higher. So now I want to add a noise on this, but not on the position. I want to use this noise value to drive something else. So if we type in noise, we can of course grab our attribute noising here. And by default, it will be stored in something which is called a CD, which stands for color value. This is the coloring, as you can see, of the colors of the points. So if you would enable or disable this toggle here, you might see or not see the colors. You might also here have the same icon here as well for visualizing some of these elements. So with this, it's going to be doing the same thing, like making certain noise patterns and storing this in the color of the points. Now, what we want to do with this is, let's say I want to have an extrude node that is controlled by this noise, by the noise. So attributes are really important to understand in Houdini. So we're going to create an attribute stored on the primitive, and then our extrude node will use that as distance for extruding. So a couple of things to do here before we can actually use this in the extrude node is, first of all, we need to set this value to a float, because an extrusion value is just a value of how far it will go. So here we can just call this noise. Can keep it simple, just call it noise. And like I said, an extrusion will probably be happening on the primitive level, so we can switch this to primitive. So now we have stored the float value noise under primitives. So for each primitive in my sphere, as you can see, it will generate like a random or a noise value. If you want to exactly see how these values are, I recommend going here to geometry spreadsheet. And here we have our options where to save data. So points, vertices, primitives, and detail. So usually like points and primitives are very commonly used, detail as well, but here we are mainly going to work with points and primitives. So here, as you can see, under primitives, we have a noise value that I basically here created. So if I would amplitude this, it will just create bigger values or smaller values. Now, this is basically ready to go. Another thing, if you want to visualize this even more, you can go here to the information icon, and then you can click on noise as well in case you need that. So in this case, it's displayed by a color. So that might be useful in case there is no icon here to press. You can always like view interesting data by here clicking on the values. So we are ready to go now. We have a primitive where a noise value is on. So that's now placed in the extrusion node. So on this extrusion node, we can then here grab the handle, or we can go here with distances. We can make a distance value. And to make this fully work, I'm going to divide the extrusion into individual elements, which means that each primitive will be extrude along its normal. Then we need to multiply the noise value with this distance. This can be done in local control. So with local control, we can use attributes to override values. So here, if I go and enable distancing scaling, by default it's filled in Z-scale, but Z-scale doesn't exist. So we want to override this and type in our own noise. And now, as you can see, we are now having our noise on top of this. So if I would create here some changes, you will see that we were now having different types of shapes. So this is a way on using attributes, for example, in an extrude node, which is really useful. So if you have like a game that's a bit more like sci-fi, this is quite useful to generate some of interesting shapes. This setup is also like, again, procedurally. So we want to plug in something differently. Go ahead, take, for example, like a big head, which is the classic test geometry. And you will see we'll just make something like this, where it will like randomly extrude those elements. Maybe quickly gonna hide here some of these elements, maybe hide the material. So we have our basic geometry now being extruded like that. So as you can see, Houdini is now quite flexible in doing these type of things. We can change things, can change the input, can change different nodes, can play around with noises, can play around with attributes. So these are the basic, essentially, workflows, I would say, is by taking a certain input shape, doing a certain logic on top of this, and then we have our result that we sometimes need to clean up to then export. So to reiterate as well, attributes are quite important to understand. So each geometry has attribute data. So in this case here as well, we can see that We have different types of attributes like position, different materials, different UV, different groups as well. So this is essentially to know about, if you want to understand Houdini better, this is going to be important that you understand what attributes are and how to use them. So there are a bunch of also like attributes nodes as well. If you just type an attribute, there are a bunch of attribute different nodes, but don't worry too much about that. As for example, the noising attributes and attribute the randomness is also very commonly used in many workflows. Now maybe let's go back here to our level here and maybe hide here. So for the next demo, let's make again new geometry network. And like I said before, like we're on an object level, so this is just a gathering of different object structures. So to keep things clean, you can just make new geometry nodes or containers to make something new. So here we want to talk a bit about instancing, scattering, and how this sort of like translates into the game engine. So let's start with the first step, which is like general scattering systems. How can I have a model and calculate points on the surface? So we're going to make the test geometry like a big head, which is the quite popular test geometry. And we want to then scatter assets on them. We also don't maybe need the shader for now. We're just going to scatter points on it. In case you are interested into loading your own files, because you might want to scatter something that you made in another program or that you maybe gathered from a library like Megascans, you can use the file node in that case. So the file node will point to the location of an FBX file and it will then load the geometry. So once we have a geometry, we can then use a scattering node. So there are mainly two nodes for scattering in Houdini on geometry. So we have the default scattering node and we have scatter and align. Now I'm actually going to use scatter and align because it has a couple nice features that I want to show here as well. So place it here and just plug it in like that. And it will usually spawn 1 point or a couple points depending on the scaling, of course. Now, the interesting setting over here is the coverage. So this is how much coverage, how often do we need points? Do we need this along the mesh or do we want to have this a bit less? So let's just crank this up to just 1. And then we only still have like 3 points, which is not that much. So we're going to also go with scaling, and changing the scaling means that we're going to spawn more points. Now, before I maybe add more points, maybe let's visualize them a bit better by adding something on top of them. So we can do here is grabbing something which is called a copy to points. Very popular node, very useful node. So we're going to copy an object, a geometry on a point. Now, our geometry can be something simple, just for previewing, like a sphere. It could be a simple sphere. Maybe we can set this to a low poly sphere. And this is our input to copy, and this is then the points where we want to have the copy on. And this is then copying to those points. We probably want to set the sphere to scale 2 as well, since that will match the surface a bit better. So with our big head, I can now here displace my big head. We have like a couple giant spheres, but let's add more of them. Like I mentioned, we actually need to change the scale to add more of them. So in this case, by default, the scaling will control how much points will be scattered. So we have minimum, maximum, and the uniform. So the uniform is like the global scaling value. So lowering this will create more points. Increasing this will try to create bigger objects, as you can see, bigger spheres. So we want to maybe lower this, let's say be to 0.2. So we have a bunch of these spheres now. And now to add scale variation, we can play around with min and max. So our minimum can be, for example, 0.5, 0.4, and our maximum could be like 2. So we have a nice variation in that. So now it fills the surface a bit better object. And like I said before, we can plug in different shapes, like I showed you in the previous example, plugging in something different. If you want to just maybe like preview it on a plane for now, that's also fine. Depending on, of course, what is the scattering we want to do, we might want to do different things. So scattering on the plane also usually means with this node that the intersection will also almost be none, since it does a good job at that to avoid intersection here. So this is like a useful scattering node. If we take a look at the other scattering node, if we plug it in over here, it will by default create a couple more points. We can plug this in like so. And what you will see is that by default, there is no scaling setup. It will all be the same scale value. So we need to actually do another pass of certain attribute changes to define what the scaling are. That's why the scatter and align node is really useful, because it does take care of scaling and also rotation. So if we quickly now go back to aligning here as well, the scatter and align, scrolling down will reveal also options for orientation and rotation. So we can now start to rotate this, but since this is a sphere, you won't notice the rotation, of course, too much. So maybe either change the object, or what if we just add a simple color? Let's bring up a color node, and we can give this like a random color or something like that. So now, if we would start to play around with the scaling, with the rotation, we can see that we can now randomly have rotations on these points, which is of course super useful. So let's say we are building a system to scatter foliage or rocks. We of course want every placement of a rock or some grass shape to be different. We want to have a slight rotation value in it, so it doesn't appear to be super repeating. So this is just useful that this is all built in the node, and I just recommend using this one for basic and quick scattering systems. Now, on top of this, what I additionally would usually do is also place another node, which is called instancing attributes. So it's called labs instancing attributes. So again, make sure labs is installed. I've used a couple labs tools, so make sure you install labs as well. So what this will do is it will sort of like take care of attributes for instancing, which is also directly related to Unreal and Unity. So in this case, there are options here to enable scattering for Unreal or for Unity. So you can enable these to make sure that they're working with that. So you can plug this in over here, and by default, as you can see, it should not change that much. It changed the orientation, and I know why this is, because if we go to point transformation, we have a tab here for rotation. The first one was for scale. So in rotation, it will try to look up existing rotation values based on the normal of the mesh. But the scattering won't put any normal. It will basically output something which is called an orient here. It does output the normal, but the orient has a priority. So we go here, I need to set this to orient. And now we basically have the same orientation, as you can see. Now, in addition on that, this node as well can do additional scaling and rotations. So here we can do additional scaling. We can also go with random scaling as well. So in case, like I said, if you use the other, if you would use the other scattering node, you would need to also, for example, here use this method to add additional scaling or rotation. So I can quickly go here and play around with some of the scaling and rotation values, as you can see. So this node is helping you in case you don't have any scaling, rotation values, things like that. So this is a very useful node if you would generate custom point clouds and you want to do additional steps to that, which is usually really great to have here. So I'm going to maybe reset my scaling values here quickly to the default. And maybe also I don't need the rotation for now, doesn't matter that much in my case. So that's our basic steps or our first steps. I'm going to delete this, and we have our base system to work with. So I want to now bring this in Unreal. I want to have a tool that can scatter something on something. So I'm going to have an input, like a landscape or something that you made yourself. And then my tool is then looking at that object and then placing then certain rocks or shapes on those geometries. So the next steps would be making an HDA, so a digital asset. This is a very powerful concept in Houdini. So this is making your own custom tools and tool sets, which of course in long term, you will benefit so much from this, from having custom tools in your project. So let's wrap up this small system to something like an HDA. As my tool should have always an input, I'm only going to select these 5 nodes. So I don't need my sort of like input shape to be inside of my tool, because I want to change my input. So we're going to select these nodes. We're going to go to assets. We want to make a new digital asset or new HDA from my selection. And it will then bring up a menu, and it will also here collapse, as you can see, the network. So we're going to give this a name like basic scattering tool or something. Basic scatter tool, and then we press OK. Then this menu will pop up, and this menu is mainly interested here in the parameters. This is for making a custom interface. So here, if we look into our network here, we collapsed our system into a node, and our parameter interface is empty. So this is why here we can create a custom parameters. So the way you can do this, there are many ways, is we can grab, for example, a float. You can grab it in here, press apply, and now you have a float value with a slider. But right now it's not really linked to anything, so it doesn't do anything special. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to show you a bit of a better way of doing these things. So delete, I'm going to apply to make sure it's empty again. What we can do is we can go actually inside an HDA. So we can go back this in here, and we can start to modify our tool, of course, because this is the core logic of the tool. So what are important settings I would like to have? One of them is the scattering density. So going back to my scattering tool or scattering node, we're going to go to our uniform scaling, and we want to basically now grab this value and drag it in our tool. So this is now our density. So I'm going to just call this like density, or maybe just like density scale. And we press apply, and it will now basically turn into a green box. So green means that this has now been linked to or referenced to something else. If we click on the name itself, we can see the underlying logic, which has now a channel reference to something which is called uniform scale. So this is referencing now to my tool. So don't worry too much about this. It's mainly a very useful way to now link different things together here in Houdini. So the minimum and maximum radius is also very useful. So press apply. Something else that will be very useful in Unreal is talking about like the instancing and the objects we want to instance. So this won't necessarily work by default in Unreal. So we're going to go to our instancing tool that I've created here. And in there, we want to enable, make sure to set it to work for Unreal. And I want to fully grab my instance variance naming here. And we're going to press apply. So our menu will now be expanded in a whole bigger area, as you can see. It will be now a bit bigger. So now, again, pressing apply and accept. And now let's bring this into Unreal and see what's happening. I'm definitely going to come back and make changes, but let's already see what's going to happen. So in Unreal, I have the default project. I just launched Unreal and I said like create a default project with no any content, which will give you this starter map. So before I want to use my Houdini tools inside of Unreal, same for Unity, is double checking that you have Houdini engine. So make sure you have this installed, make sure you can use this, so you can start create session, and I will basically now start to link up with my Houdini. So this is the first major step if you want to have this connection between Houdini and Unreal or Unity, is to make sure that we have Houdini engine installed. There are some videos out there. You can find tutorials on how to install this and how to get this. So go there and look at that. I'm not going to go here in detail about it. I'm just going to show you some of the tools directly in here. So I'm now going to open my content browser, going to go to my HDA folder, and I will now drag and drop my scattering tool. Oh, I will maybe dock this window, and I will drag and drop my scattering tool in here. So with my scattering tool here, we can of course drag it in the scene, and now it will start cooking. So it's now done cooking. It's ready to go, but of course it's just showing up the default Houdini logo. So we want to change this, and like I said, our tool needs an input. So we can see our parameters or the values that we made inside of Houdini. They are of course working, but nothing is showing up because again, our Houdini input over here, we need to say what input we should use. So to keep things simple for now is maybe let's make a sphere in the scene. So shape, let's add a sphere. Let's maybe make this a bit bigger, put it over here. And in our Houdini tool, like I said, inputs, we want to set this to something from the world. So here we want to change this to world outliner. So we want to pick something from the scene or the world. Now doing this will give us an option to select here and select sphere and use current selection. So the sphere is now being added to my tool. So you can see here that my sphere is now included as input. So I can of course add multiple objects. I can basically add this whole scene, but that might take a moment to calculate, as I will use the terrain of course for scattering, which I will show in a moment. So the default now is here that we have these spheres scattered on spheres. So this is my default result. So we can control the density. We can make this a bit bigger. We have then bigger spheres. We can make smaller spheres. So we can change and tweak the values. So what we should now also do with this is talk about instancing as well. So now I'm basically loading like an almost hard-coded object made inside of the tool, which is this sphere with this random colors that I made, which doesn't make much sense. So I already actually exported a couple of these rocks that I just made. I previously exported them. So you can do the same, like export a couple of these rocks that I just showed you how to create. And we want to now use this instead of the spheres that we have. So going back to Houdini. So in here, if we go on our network, so we are creating our point clouds or our scattering points, and we directly are copying that sphere on top of this. So we don't want to do this step anymore. We basically want to directly feed a point cloud like this to Houdini, to Unreal. So for the time being, I'm just going to build a switch node. And I'm going to switch from one to another. I'm going to set it here manually. So I'm going to switch now to what the output for Unreal should be, which is just a point cloud with, of course, with the data that is needed. So what is usually needed when we send data from Houdini to Unreal is that, of course, we need an instancing attribute. So this node will take care for that for you. Then we also, of course, need information about how something is scaled and how something is rotated. So these are the important things to set. And this node will take care for most of it. That's why I like to use this node, because you don't have to go through additional steps. This node will make sure that it will work. So now this is ready to go. We are going to send a point cloud, saving our tool, of course, and let's go back to Unreal. Here we're going to our top of the menu, and we're going to click Rebuild. So Rebuild will make it from scratch, and what we will now see is these orange cubes. So that's already a good sign. That means that the instancing from Houdini to Unreal is working, but it doesn't know what to instance, because we still have not defined the component or the mesh to instance. So that's the first step there. Now, to do that is using this menu that I also made here, is using instant variants. So we want to give a path to what model to instance. Now, this is quite easily done. So we can take one of my rocks, drag and drop it in here, and it will fill in the path where this is in my game. So it's stored under game assets rocks. And then we'll scatter these rocks on the sphere, as you can see. And this is like an easy way of scattering these rocks now. So we can click adding more variants. So here we're going to click at additional, grab our other rock like this, and it will instance those rocks. So in this case, again, I'm using rocks as an example, but you can do other things like foliage, trees, buildings, whatever you have. This is just basically instancing and copying a model onto a point that we calculate in Houdini. Now, what if we can use one of the terrains here around the scene, which is, again, this is the default scene from Unreal. So let's take one of those tiles into our system. So under inputs, we can then change this to a landscape. So we can input a landscape. Now, there are probably a couple of these tiles, as you can see them. So I want to take something that has some detail like this. So this is one. This one is called 310. Let's go back to my Houdini tool. Oh, it's now hidden. So let's go here and set this to landscape, and let's find the 310 somewhere around here. Now, by default, I don't think it's going to scatter here. And the reason for that is if we go under advanced, there are many ways of sending your height field to Houdini. So by default, height field is just basically like a texture map defining the height of the terrain. But our scattering tool is not going to work with that. So we need to convert this into a mesh or export this as a mesh, which will, of course, our scattering tool will work with that. So here we are now scattering all these small rocks now on the terrain. And like I said before, we can go back to our sliders and play around with this, play around with the skinning. So that's pretty useful. We can change min maximum. We can also in here target the scaling of the objects themselves. So we can scale the rocks a bit bigger if you want to have like a really chunky rocky shapes. Now, additionally, to come a bit more to an end here is, what if we now want to use the terrain information? Let's say I want to target something like a cliff maker or generating where things are different angled. So going now back to Houdini, in here we can change a couple things. So we have our pickup here as dust. So let's maybe increase the density scale. So maybe let's put it a bit lower. So we have the same idea here as, let's say we want to scatter objects where things are not flat. So before we are doing a scatter, maybe we can cut off parts of the geometry we don't want to scatter on. So we are going to use a node called split by normal. And this node will, like I said, it will split your geometry based on the normal it has. So this is by default now set to X, but we want to have the up axis, which is in Houdini the Y. So everything that is, for example, looking up will be selected here. So we can invert that. So everything that is not flat will be basically scattered by rocks. And this is then the tolerance of that. So our tolerance, this can also be a parameter in the tool, but for now, let's maybe put it around like 15, 20, something like that, and plug it in over here. And let's go save our tool, and let's go back to Unreal. In Unreal, same as before, rebuild the tool, and we'll probably now, as you can see, fill up only parts that are not that flat, that are a bit more steep. So we can play around with this and have like I said, like a cliff sort of maker. Not exactly sure because we're actually instancing a lot of shapes. But this is a quite interesting setup now to play around with, to have like different shapes, different scales. It's nice to maybe have like one big rock and a couple smaller ones. So this can be very fast if you need to dress up the scene or dress up a scene for a game jam, where this could be like a walkable area, but it's like flat, it won't place the rocks. And you can have the parameter here to tweak that, but you can always go back to Houdini, of course. In Houdini, we can here play around with that threshold here, maybe set it a bit higher, like this. Can boost the values a bit. Also, nothing is holding us back to do additional scattering and other setups. Like I can copy paste this node. I can maybe invert the node, and maybe now I can define where different grass models should be. Like here, maybe we have grass shapes, or maybe different tweaks or something like that, maybe different shapes scattered. And we can do another setup where we have then another scatter system. We have a different scattering system. We can do another instancing system as well to instance different objects. And this can then be like, I don't know, maybe grass. And then we can merge this together like so. And then we have a generator for rocks, and then one for grass, and maybe we can have another one, or another one, another one, and so on. So we can now see that we can branch out and explore many different scattering options and systems. And you can go as advanced as also now starting to compare different systems. If you're be more familiar with Houdini, you can, for example, look into like Vex and Wrangle nodes. So here we can, for example, start to compare the different scatterings of each other, and we can write something interesting to maybe if we place a rock, maybe a rock has priority of placing foliage and so on. So we can do different things that react from one to another. That can be really interesting. But to keep things very basic, as you can see, with only these 3 nodes, basically, we can make an interesting scattering setup for you. So let's maybe switch, save this back again. Going to Unreal, rebuild the tool. And we will now have a bit more fine-tuned. So I put it a bit more extreme, as you can see. We don't have that many rocks. But it's quite interesting. Like it already gives a lot of interesting shapes. Instead of having nothing, it already like blends the shapes a bit better. Another interesting thing that I might want to mention is that this is also using nanite, in case you are interested in that. So my rocks are still a bit on like a higher poly count. They're not like reduced heavily, but nanite is doing like a great job to help us with that, of course. So we don't also have a lot of overdraw as well, since they are just rocks. So that's just great to know that we can just scatter or instance a nanite object, of course. This is not exclusively to only basic objects, but it can just scatter anything. We can also scatter blueprints, we can scatter light components. We can do many different things with scattering systems of Houdini engine. So that was some basics of building a Houdini tool with Houdini engine. So I hope you will have some idea now on making your own small little tool that does something like a scattering or making a rock or doing something else. There are many options you can do here. So just hope you can understand that this definitely will speed up your workflow instead of like manually placing rocks or having other ways of doing things more manually, but we can actually essentially do things a bit more automated by defining simple rule sets. Now going quickly back to the slides, the last thing to talk about was the Game Jam toolkit. So I'm not going to show it here in depth too much. There is already a lot of information about this already. So this is essentially tools in Houdini that are available for free for you to try. So you can go to the SideFX website and you will be able to see starter kits for Unreal and Unity. So in this case, it's Unreal, but it's of course with Unity as well. Both have the same tool set. So you can open these tools, you can try them out, play around with them. There are all kinds of tools. I think there are like 10 to 12 different tools, from trees to edge damaging to level generators to rock generators, foliage. There's a bunch of tools for you to look into that can already be helpful in case you quickly need a tree or something like that. You can just load the tool, render out the tree and make a new one and so on. You can just quickly have trees, for example. There is also a lot of learning as well on this. So there is a learning page on how these tools work. So each tool is explained with a video. There is also more explanation in terms of just if you're new to Houdini engine or is this the first time using Houdini Engine, there's a video about how Houdini Engine works and how you can install it. And then for each tool, there is a video, like I said, like for example, for the tree or for an edge damaging tool where you can input a shape, will damage the edges off. So each of the tools have video, so you can fully learn everything here in that page on sideeffects.com. And that was it for this workshop. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a couple things here and there with Houdini. I hope you're interested in pushing Houdini and learning about it to use in future project or in this project already you're working on. And thank you.